Welcome to the Sleepy Scribe. Your endless internet wandering has brought you here, and hopefully you can finally sleep to today's topic story. Now, before we begin, comment where you are listening from, and how late it is where you are. It is so very interesting to see how far and wide people come to listen. Lastly, if you enjoy these videos, please subscribe, it would be very appreciated. Now, let us begin. The sun was already high above Alexandria, spilling its molten light across the harbor like a god idly emptying his cup of honey, and the masts of merchant ships stood like forest groves against the shimmering sky. Fishmongers called in a dozen tongues, their voices mingling with the laughter of children darting barefoot between stalls, but our focus rested on a single figure pushing through the crowd. Neferu, no more than 20 summers old, wearing the plain linen of a commoner yet walking with the tense precision of someone balancing a sealed jar atop her head. She clutched in her hand a folded papyrus sealed with the mark of the royal steward, proof that she had been summoned, or perhaps condemned, to serve within the palace of Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. The palace itself did not so much sit upon the earth as hover above it in splendor, its white limestone walls catching the light until they seemed to glow from within, its bronze gates worked into the shapes of rearing cobras whose jeweled eyes glinted like they knew every sin ever committed in Alexandria. The scent of lotus and cinnamon drifted over the harbor wall, a whisper of the world beyond those gates, mingling with the salt of the sea and the sharper tang of oil from the fishermen's nets. As Neferu approached, her heart drummed in her ears like the double-headed sistrum, and she wondered if the cobras could hear it. The guards at the gate were Roman, tall, broad-shouldered, with crested helmets that caught the sun, but their armor was not the dull brass of the battlefield. It gleamed, polished to mirror brightness, and Neferu caught her own reflection in one soldier's breastplate, pale-faced and wide-eyed, as though she were a ghost haunting herself. The older of the two guards looked her up and down with the practiced disinterest of someone who had seen every kind of petitioner, from trembling farmers to overconfident merchants bearing gifts for the queen's favor. "Name," he demanded, his Greek sharp as a sword's edge. She gave it, holding out the papyrus. His eyes flicked to the seal, then to her again, and for a moment he seemed to weigh the trouble she might cause against the entertainment she might provide. At last he stepped aside, muttering something to his companion that made the younger man smirk. Inside the gates, the world shifted. The noise of the harbor dimmed, replaced by the gentle splash of fountains and the distant plucking of a harp. The air was cooler here, shaded by colonnades of polished stone, and beneath Neferu's feet the ground became inlaid mosaic, tiny tesserae forming swirling blue waves that seemed to ripple as she walked. The scent of flowers was stronger now, as though every breeze had been trained to carry it to her nose, and servants moved through the corridors like purposeful shadows, each carrying trays of figs, scrolls, or folded linen. Neferu had never seen such wealth. Gold leaf traced the edges of doorways, ivory panels gleamed beside carved cedar, and every corner seemed to hold some priceless thing. A vase painted with scenes of hunting ibex, a marble bust of a stern-faced Ptolemy, a couch draped in leopard skin. It was not simply opulence, it was a reminder, humming in every polished surface, that power here was as old as the Nile itself and twice as dangerous. She was led by a scribe, a thin man with ink-stained fingers who never once looked directly at her, through a series of halls whose ceilings soared high enough to house entire ships. At last they entered the Hall of Two Horizons, where the queen was said to hold private audiences. But Cleopatra was not upon her throne. Instead, she reclined upon a couch strewn with silk cushions, her head resting on one hand as she listened to a man seated across from her, a Roman, if his cloak and bearing were any sign, with a hawk-like profile and the sort of self-assured stillness that comes from knowing entire legions obey your word. Neferu dared not stare at Cleopatra, yet she could not help it. The queen's presence was like the sudden scent of rain in summer, unexpected, electric, impossible to ignore. Her skin was warm gold, her eyes lined with kohl that drew them out into almond-shaped mysteries, and when she smiled at something the Roman said, the entire room seemed to lean toward her. That smile was not a simple thing. It was a weapon, a gift, and a trap, all in one. The scribe bowed so low his forehead nearly brushed the floor, and Neferu, unsure of the protocol, attempted something halfway between a bow and a collapse, which earned a flicker of amusement from Cleopatra's gaze. "And who?" the queen asked, her voice smooth as honey poured from a jar. "Is this little river reed you've brought me?" The scribe murmured an explanation, but Cleopatra's attention was already on Neferu, studying her as one might examine an uncut gem, considering what beauty, or danger, might be coaxed from it. The Roman, for his part, glanced at Neferu only briefly, then returned his gaze to Cleopatra, though Neferu sensed in that glance the calculation of a man noting every face in the room for later recall. "You will serve in the inner court," Cleopatra said at last, and there was the faintest curve of humor at her lips, as if she knew this decision would pull Neferu into currents from which she might never escape. "And you will keep your eyes open. A court is a river, child. What you see floating upon the surface is never the whole of it." As she spoke, a gust of wind from the open balcony brought the scent of the sea and something else, the faint, metallic tang of politics, invisible yet as sharp as any blade, and Neferu knew without knowing why that her life had just changed forever. Neferu felt the words settle into her bones like the first rumble of a coming storm, and before she could fully comprehend what had been said, the queen had already turned her attention back to the Roman, dismissing her presence with the grace of one who could rearrange destinies between sips of wine. The scribe tugged at her sleeve with an urgency that suggested lingering in Cleopatra's gaze for too long was a kind of trespass, and they retreated from the Hall of Two Horizons into the winding arteries of the palace. The scribe's sandals slapped softly against the marble, his muttered instructions spilling out like a half-forgotten incantation, where she would sleep, where she must never be seen without permission, and above all, where she must never go under any circumstances. The last instruction was punctuated with a glance so sharp it might have drawn blood. The Hall of Anubis, where matters too sensitive for even rumor were dealt with. Neferu, being human and young, immediately decided she would have to see it. They emerged into an open courtyard where sunlight poured in like molten gold, casting a glow upon the papyrus-lined pools and the spray of the fountains that danced in the breeze. Date palms swayed lazily, their fronds whispering against the deep blue sky, and white doves pecked at grains scattered by a stooped old servant. The smell here was intoxicating, lotus flowers mingling with honeycakes cooling on a tray nearby, the faint salt of the sea carried inland on warm air. A trio of women sat beneath a canopy of woven reeds, their laughter bubbling up like spring water as they shared a plate of figures. Neferu noticed that they all wore bracelets of gold shaped like serpents, each coiled twice around the wrist with emerald eyes. The scribe announced her, and the women's laughter softened into the measured smiles of courtiers who could turn warmth into frost at will. "Another lamb for the queen's pen," one of them murmured, her voice lilting like the Nile's current, and Neferu was not sure whether it was kindness or mockery. The eldest of the women, who introduced herself as Izet, was to be Neferu's guide in the weeks ahead. She had skin like polished cedar and eyes that missed nothing, and though her voice was gentle, it carried the weight of someone who knew where every skeleton in the palace was buried, and perhaps had buried a few herself. "You will start in the perfumery," Izet said, steering Neferu toward a set of carved wooden doors. "Every drop of scent that touches the queen's skin passes through the hands of those who work there. It is an honor and a burden. If the perfume is too heavy, the queen will smell like a merchant's wife in the spice quarter. If too light, she will fade into the background, and our queen does not fade." The perfumery was a world unto itself. The air shimmered with heat from the braziers, and the scent was so thick it clung to Neferu's throat. Rows of alabaster jars lined the walls, each sealed with wax and marked with symbols, a lotus for sweetness, a falcon for sharpness, a palm for freshness. Women worked in silence, grinding petals and resin with pestles of polished basalt, their hands stained with the colors of their craft. Neferu was set to work under the watchful eye of a woman named Kia, whose fingers moved like a harpist's as she blended oils. "Do not breathe too deeply," Kia advised without looking up. "The first time I worked here, I fainted before the hour was done. Cleopatra likes her perfumes like she likes her words, layered, lingering, and dangerous." Neferu found herself smiling despite the warning, inhaling the warm, floral air as she sorted petals of blue lotus from the stems. The work was meticulous, almost hypnotic, and for a while, the palace around her seemed to recede into the background hum of mortars grinding and oil dripping into crystal flasks. But her thoughts kept circling back to the Roman in the Queen's Hall, the way his gaze had swept over her like a quick knife. Who was he? And why did Cleopatra seem so invested in whatever he had to say? At midday, Izet returned to fetch her, leading her through another series of corridors where the cool shade was broken by sudden bursts of light from open courtyards. In one, Neferu glimpsed a pair of young men practicing with short swords, their movements sharp and fluid like the flight of swallows. In another, a group of scribes argued over a scroll so heatedly one of them accidentally knocked over an ink jar, leaving a black wound on the white marble. At last they arrived at the banquet hall, where a feast was being laid out. The scent of roasting lamb mingled with saffron and coriander, and servants moved in precise formations, setting down platters of honeyed dates, bowls of pomegranate seeds, and loaves of bread still steaming from the oven. Musicians tuned their instruments in the corner, the high pluck of the lute mingling with the low hum of the double pipes. "The Queen will dine with her guest this evening," Isette explained, nodding toward the raised dais at the far end of the hall where two high-backed chairs awaited. "And you will be here, serving wine." Neferu blinked. "I thought I was in the perfumery." "Tonight," Isette said with a faint smile, "you are in the banquet hall. The Queen likes to see how new servants handle the presence of important company. And make no mistake, the Roman is important." As evening fell, the hall filled with golden light from bronze lamps, the scent of myrrh curling through the air like invisible smoke. Neferu took her place beside the wine amphora, heart pounding, as Cleopatra entered in a gown of deep green silk, her hair bound in gold, every step as deliberate as the opening move of a game of senet. The Roman was already there, standing as she approached, his eyes locking with hers in a silent exchange that made the air feel heavier somehow. They sat, and the musicians began to play. Neferu moved forward to pour the Queen's wine, careful not to spill a drop, and as she stepped back, she caught the faintest fragment of their conversation, something about ships, and Rome, and a storm that was coming. The music swelled and bent like a river in flood, carrying with it the laughter of courtiers and the muted clink of gold bracelets against polished goblets. The banquet hall was alive now, a great breathing creature of silk and bronze, its heart beating in time with Cleopatra's every gesture. She spoke little at first, letting the Roman, Mark Antony, Neferu overheard someone whisper, to fill the air with his deep, rolling voice, a voice that seemed made to command men across battlefields yet softened here, as though the Queen herself was the only audience worth convincing. Neferu kept her head bowed, eyes trained on the amphora as she poured wine for a nobleman whose rings were so heavy his fingers curled like talons. Yet her ears strained toward the dais, catching scraps of talk that glinted like coins in the dirt, grain shipments from the Nile Delta, unrest in the eastern provinces, the movements of fleets across the Mediterranean. Every so often, Cleopatra would laugh, a low, honeyed sound that made the Roman lean forward, as though the laugh itself were a secret. The platters arrived in endless procession, roast quail glazed with pomegranate, figs stuffed with almonds and dripping with honey, bowls of lentils spiced with cumin and coriander. Servants moved with the precision of dancers, each one knowing the exact placement of every dish, every goblet, every folded linen. Neferu found herself brushing past others like currents weaving through a stream, each of them avoiding collisions with the instinct of long practice. "You're staring," a voice murmured at her side. She turned to find Kia from the perfumery balancing a tray of pastries shaped like lotus flowers. "I'm not," Neferu whispered. "You are," Kia replied with a sly grin. "But so is everyone else. This," she tilted her head toward the dais, "is a performance. Watch closely. One day, you might understand the script." Neferu risked another glance at the Queen. Cleopatra had drawn Antony into a discussion about the stars, pointing upward toward the night beyond the high windows, where the constellations glittered like scattered jewels. The Queen's hand traced the shape of Orion, her voice weaving tales of gods and hunters, of love and vengeance written in the sky. Antony listened intently, as though this knowledge were worth more than all the gold in Egypt. Neferu noticed something then. When Cleopatra spoke, she rarely looked directly at Antony for long. Instead, her gaze would wander over the room, touching the faces of courtiers, servants, even musicians, making each feel for a heartbeat as though her words were meant for them alone. It was a spell, and Neferu could feel its threads tugging even at her. Midway through the feast, a commotion stirred at the far end of the hall. A messenger, dust still clinging to his cloak, had arrived, kneeling before the Queen with a scroll in hand. The music faltered as all eyes turned to the dais. Cleopatra broke the seal, her gaze scanning the lines. For a moment, her expression did not change, then the corner of her mouth twitched, just slightly, before she folded the papyrus and slipped it beneath the edge of her plate. "You will excuse me, my lord," she said to Antony, her voice as smooth as if she had merely been offered more wine. "It seems the gods have sent us an unexpected turn in our game." Antony's brow furrowed. "A move from Rome." She smiled, not a warm smile, but the kind a crocodile might offer just before the water closes over its prey. "Perhaps. Or perhaps from closer to home." Either way, it will make the next act all the more interesting. Conversation resumed, though a ripple of unease passed through the hall like wind over the Nile. Neferu continued her duties, but her mind burned with questions. What message could provoke that flicker in Cleopatra's expression? And why did it feel as though, without knowing it, she had just stepped onto a board where pieces were already in motion? When the feast finally ended, the Queen and Antony withdrew to a private chamber, leaving the hall to dissolve into a flurry of clearing platters and extinguishing lamps. Neferu carried the last of the wine back to the storeroom, her feet aching, her head light with exhaustion and the lingering scent of myrrh. As she passed through a narrow corridor, she caught a low murmur, two voices, male, speaking in hurried Greek. She slowed, pressing herself into the shadow of a column. Said the message came from the hall of Anubis itself, one voice whispered. If that is true, then it was meant for her eyes alone. And yet she showed nothing, the other replied. Nothing at all. That is why she is dangerous. Footsteps approached, and Neferu slipped away before she could be discovered, her pulse quickening. The hall of Anubis, one of the places Izet had warned her never to go. Yet now, like a torch in the dark, it burned in her mind. Sleep came to Neferu that night like an uninvited guest, tapping at the edge of her mind but never entering fully. She lay on the narrow couch of the servants' quarters, staring at the carved beams above, tracing the patterns of painted lotus blossoms with her eyes while the muffled sounds of Alexandria drifted in from the harbor. Somewhere in the distance, a gull cried out, and closer still came the soft shuffle of sandals along the corridor, other servants moving like ghosts in the small hours. She turned on her side, but the conversation she had overheard in the banquet hall pressed against her thoughts like the heat before a desert storm. The hall of Anubis. The message. The way Cleopatra's expression had barely moved yet somehow changed everything in the air around her. She closed her eyes, telling herself she would forget it by morning. She did not. Dawn came painted in rose and gold, the palace bathed in that first fragile light that made even the harshest stone seem soft. Neferu was summoned before she had even risen properly, Izet standing in the doorway like a shadow that had decided to speak. Up, she said, her voice clipped but not unkind. The Queen will make a procession to the library today. You will carry her scrolls. Neferu obeyed without question, fastening her linen dress and braiding her hair with fingers still heavy from sleep. The perfumery's sweet fog lingered faintly in her hair from yesterday's work, and she hoped it would be enough to pass unnoticed. They met Cleopatra in one of the palace's open courtyards, where she stood surrounded by attendants and guards. The Queen wore white today, pure and gleaming, with a collar of lapis and gold that caught the light like a river of stars. Antony was nowhere to be seen, though the Roman guards kept their posts along the route. As they walked toward the great library, the streets of Alexandria unfurled before them, a riot of color and sound. Merchants shouted from stalls draped with dyed cloth, fishmongers lifted wriggling silver catches from shallow baskets, and children darted between camel legs with the fearlessness of cats. The smell of baking bread mingled with the tang of sea air, and above it all loomed the Pharos lighthouse, its white tower rising like the finger of a god pointing toward the heavens. The library itself was a wonder that could make even the most jaded nobleman pause. Marble steps led up to massive bronze doors, each engraved with scenes of gods handing the gift of writing to humankind. Inside, the air was cool and dry, heavy with the scent of papyrus and cedar chests. Rows upon rows of scrolls filled the towering shelves, and scholars moved like bees between them, muttering to themselves as they read. Cleopatra moved through it not as a guest, but as a queen among her treasures. She ran her fingers lightly along the spines of scrolls, pausing now and then to draw one out and pass it to Neferu without a word. Neferu followed, careful to keep pace, the weight of the growing stack in her arms a small price for the chance to watch the Queen in her element. It was here, among the whispers of the past, that Cleopatra seemed most alive. "Do you read, child?" Cleopatra asked suddenly, her gaze still fixed on the shelves. The question startled Neferu so much she nearly dropped the scrolls. "A little, my queen," she admitted. "Enough to follow a prayer, or a market tally." Cleopatra turned then, her eyes sharp yet not unkind. "Then you will learn more. A servant who can read is a danger and a gift. Use the gift, but know that others will see only the danger." Before Neferu could answer, a movement at the far end of the aisle caught her attention. a tall man in a dark cloak, speaking in low tones to one of the queen's advisors. The advisor's eyes flicked toward Cleopatra, then back to the man, and something passed between them, quick as a fish darting underwater. The man vanished into the shadows of the library before Neferu could see his face. "Come," Cleopatra said, as though nothing had happened. But Neferu noticed her steps grew a fraction swifter, her gaze sharper on the shelves they passed. By the time they returned to the palace, the sun was high, and the courtyards shimmered in its heat. Neferu was sent to the storage rooms to set down the scrolls, the cool shade a relief after the glare outside. But just as she placed the last scroll on the cedar shelf, she heard voices from the corridor, 2 guards speaking in hurried Latin. She could not understand every word, but she caught enough. Anubis, tonight, the queen herself. The sound of their sandals began to move away, but the words clung to her like burrs. Tonight, the hall of Anubis, and Cleopatra. That night, when the palace had gone still and the air was thick with the scent of extinguished lamps, Neferu found herself awake again, her mind buzzing. The hall of Anubis was forbidden, but if Cleopatra was going there, and the guards were speaking of it, her feet touched the cold mosaic floor before she decided to move. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this was the moment when a servant either remained part of the furniture of the palace, or became part of its story. The corridors at night were not the same corridors by day. In the daylight, they breathed with the rustle of linen robes, the shuffle of sandals, the murmur of courtiers gliding from one audience to another. But now, beneath the dim flicker of oil lamps, they seemed to hold their breath. Shadows pooled in the corners like sleeping cats, and the polished floors reflected slivers of light that looked almost like watchful eyes. Neferu moved as silently as she could, her bare feet making no sound on the cool mosaic. She carried no lamp, light would betray her, relying instead on the faint glow spilling from distant braziers and the patterns she had memorized in her weeks at the palace. The hall of Anubis lay far from the servants' quarters, past the formal reception rooms and the long gallery of statues where even in the daytime the air felt colder. The statues here were not the smooth, smiling forms of gods and kings that adorned the main halls. These were guardians with jackal heads and stern, forward-facing stares, carved in black basalt that seemed to drink the light. Neferu stayed pressed against the cool stone for what felt like an eternity, the carved lotus motifs digging into her back as if the palace itself were urging her to remain still. When she finally dared to breathe deeply, the air tasted of old incense and dust, and her ears strained for any sound of returning footsteps. None came. She slipped away like a shadow pulling itself free from the wall, her bare feet whispering over the mosaic tiles. The hall of Anubis, now silent behind her, seemed to radiate the weight of the conversation she had just overheard. Every word lingered in her mind: bread, fear, cypress, each like a bead on a string she dared not touch too hard for fear it would snap. She made her way back toward the servants' quarters, winding through the labyrinth of corridors. The palace at night was not without its dangers for a wandering servant. It was said there were guards whose sole purpose was not to protect the queen from intruders, but to protect the queen's secrets from wandering ears. Neferu could not tell whether those were just whispers to frighten the new attendants or a warning with teeth. When she reached the long gallery of statues, she slowed. The jackal-headed guardians stared down at her once more, their basalt faces unreadable in the dim light. She had the odd sensation that they knew precisely what she had done. A faint rustle echoed behind her. She spun, but there was nothing, only the soft flicker of a wall torch and the swaying shadow of a palm frond stirred by the night breeze. Still, the hairs rose on her arms. She walked faster. By the time she slipped back into her sleeping chamber, the room was silent save for the steady breathing of the other women. Kia was curled under her linen sheet, one arm thrown over her head, her hair loose and wild against the pillow. Neferu lay down slowly, willing her heartbeat to quiet. Sleep came late and restless, bringing with it dreams of jackals with human eyes and a queen who weighed her heart on a golden scale. Morning in the palace arrived with the scent of baking bread drifting in from the kitchens and the sound of sandals scuffing along polished floors. Neferu was summoned almost immediately, a page no older than 12 appearing at the doorway to inform her that she was needed in the audience chamber. The words jolted her like cold water. Had she been seen in the hall of Anubis? Was this the moment the queen's serene smile would turn into a decree of punishment? She followed the boy through the bright corridors, past open courtyards where sunlight fell on the marble like molten gold. In the audience chamber, Cleopatra sat not on her throne, but in a low chair near the balcony, the city spread out behind her in a haze of morning light. Mark Antony was nowhere to be seen, but several advisors stood at a respectful distance, their hands folded in their sleeves. Neferu bowed low, her eyes fixed on the gleaming tiles. "Rise," Cleopatra said, her tone unreadable. Neferu obeyed, her gaze daring to lift just enough to meet the queen's eyes. Those eyes were sharp, assessing, as if peeling back the layers of her soul. "You will accompany Izet today," Cleopatra continued, "to the harbor. There is a ship arriving from Cyprus, and I require a careful accounting of its cargo." The mention of Cyprus struck like a pebble dropped into still water, ripples spreading through Neferu's thoughts. The ship. The plan. Bread and fear. "Yes, my queen," she murmured, her voice steady though her hands itched to clench. Cleopatra's gaze lingered a moment longer, then she dismissed Neferu with a flick of her fingers. Outside the chamber, Izet was waiting, her expression as smooth as the surface of still water. "You seem pale," she remarked as they began walking. "The queen has that effect on people," Neferu replied quickly, but the knowing curve of Izet's mouth made her wonder if her unease was more visible than she thought. The harbor was a riot of sound and motion, sailors shouting as they worked the ropes, gulls wheeling overhead, merchants haggling at the edge of the docks. The ship from Cyprus was easy to spot. Its sail was embroidered with a golden hawk, the emblem of one of Egypt's most trusted grain suppliers. Workers swarmed over it, hauling sacks of grain down the gangplank in a steady stream. But even as she watched, Neferu noticed something curious. Two men in fine robes, clearly not dock workers, oversaw the unloading with hawk-like attention, marking symbols onto wax tablets as each sack passed. Their eyes were sharp, their words low. Izet followed her gaze. "Not everything that arrives is for the public granaries," she said in a voice so soft Neferu almost thought she imagined it. "And not everything the queen takes is meant to be seen." Before Neferu could ask more, one of the men in fine robes glanced their way. Izet smiled politely, but her grip on Neferu's arm tightened just enough to mean do not speak. And in that moment, Neferu realized she was no longer merely carrying scrolls or pouring wine. She was walking on a bridge suspended over a river of secrets, and the current below was stronger than she had ever imagined. The harbor wind whipped at Neferu's linen robe, tugging strands of her hair free from the braids she'd tied hastily that morning. She kept her gaze on the bustling docks, pretending to be fascinated by the rhythmic sway of the cranes hauling cargo from the ship's belly, though her mind was tangled in thoughts of the two men in fine robes. They spoke to each other in hushed tones, their hands moving in small, precise gestures as though each motion itself was part of a coded language. The gulls overhead shrieked and dove, snatching at scraps of fish gut discarded by fishermen, their calls a chaotic counterpoint to the sharp, efficient activity around the Cypriot vessel. The air was thick with the smell of brine, tar, and fresh bread from nearby stalls, bread that suddenly seemed like gold to Neferu, remembering the late-night whispers about scarcity and fear. Izet moved with the poise of someone accustomed to being noticed but never questioned. She greeted the ship's overseer with a warm smile that somehow carried the weight of authority, her coal-lined eyes scanning the cargo with the ease of a cat surveying its territory. "We will need a full manifest," she told the man, her voice smooth but edged with command. He nodded quickly, signaling for a young scribe to fetch a papyrus scroll from a leather tube. While they waited, Neferu's attention drifted to the workers hauling sacks down the gangplank. Each bag was tied at the top with a knot of red twine, except for a few near the middle of the pile, which bore green knots instead. Those, she noticed, were always passed first to the robed men, who oversaw them with almost reverent care before directing them toward a separate cart stationed at the far end of the dock. She took a step toward it, but Izet's hand brushed her arm, light as a moth's wing yet firm in its meaning. "Later," she murmured, her eyes still fixed on the overseer. "There are times to ask questions, and times to watch in silence." The manifest was brought forth, and Izet unrolled it slowly, letting her eyes drift over the inked hieroglyphs as if they were merely confirming what she already knew. 100 sacks of grain, she said, tracing the line with a fingertip. 50 amphorae of olive oil. 10 crates of copper ingots, she paused, her brow smoothing almost imperceptibly. And 6 sealed chests. Destination, royal stores. The overseer's lips twitched in what might have been a nervous smile. "The Queen's personal request," he explained quickly, "from merchants in Paphos." Izet hummed softly, rolling the scroll closed. "We will see to their safe transport," she said, her tone leaving no space for negotiation. As the chests were lowered onto the dock, Neferu's curiosity burned hotter than the noonday sun. They were small enough for 2 men to carry, but clearly heavy, judging by the strain in the workers' arms. Each was bound in iron and sealed with beeswax stamped with the mark of a hawk. Whatever was inside, it was precious, and meant for eyes far above her station. When they finally turned back toward the palace, the streets of Alexandria seemed to shimmer under the afternoon light, the white limestone walls throwing the sun's heat back into the air like a furnace. Merchants shouted their wares in a dozen tongues, sailors jostled with scholars in long robes, and the scent of spice markets mingled with the tang of the harbor. Yet Neferu felt none of the usual awe she had for her city. Her thoughts were chained to those green knotted sacks and the hawk-sealed chests. Back within the palace gates, the world shifted. The noise of the city fell away, replaced by the muted hush of courtyards where fountains murmured and the rustle of palm fronds whispered in the heat. Servants moved like currents of a hidden river, each flowing toward their unseen destination. Izet led the way toward the royal storage halls, where cool shadows pooled between towering shelves stacked with grain jars, amphorae, and crates. The 6 chests were placed in a locked alcove guarded by 2 men in bronze-scaled armor. Neferu lingered just long enough to see one of them touch the hawk seal with a kind of wary respect, as if it were both a blessing and a curse. "Come," Izet said, her voice pulling Neferu back from the edge of her thoughts. "We are expected in the Queen's library." The library. Even in her uncertainty, Neferu's heart quickened. She had heard of its wonders, scrolls from every corner of the known world, maps inked with lands most had never heard of, the scent of papyrus and ink as thick as the perfume in the Queen's chambers. Yet as they walked, she couldn't shake the sense that her steps were drawing her deeper into a web she couldn't yet see, and that somewhere in its center, Cleopatra waited with the patience of a spider. Cleopatra's library was a sanctuary of shadows and secrets, where the scent of aged papyrus mingled with the faint aroma of myrrh that seemed to seep from the very walls. Heavy curtains of deep violet velvet hung at the tall windows, filtering the harsh Alexandrian sunlight into soft pools of dusk that made the room feel as if it existed out of time. Rows upon rows of scrolls stretched toward the ceiling, each carefully wrapped in linen and inscribed with scripts from the farthest reaches of the known world. Babylonian star charts, Egyptian hymns, Greek philosophies, and even whispers of knowledge from distant India. The Queen moved among them with the surety of one born to command not just armies but ideas. She paused at a low table carved from black ebony, where a scroll lay unfurled beside an inkpot and a reed pen. The air trembled with a quiet energy, as if the room itself waited for her words. "The winds are shifting," Cleopatra murmured, her fingers tracing the delicate lines of a map depicting the Mediterranean's tangled coastlines. "Rome is no longer content to watch from afar." Antony stood close by, his expression taut. "Octavian's reach grows like a vine choking a rose. We must act before the thorns pierce us both." Neferu stood at a respectful distance, clutching a small bundle of scrolls gifted to her by the scribe earlier that day. Messages from far-flung governors, reports from the Nile's border forts, and diplomatic letters folded so tightly they seemed ready to burst with unspoken truths. Cleopatra's gaze flicked to her briefly, a flash of something unreadable passing through her eyes before she turned back to the map. "Knowledge is power," the Queen said softly, "but it is also a weapon. And like any weapon, it must be wielded carefully." A sudden sharp knock at the door pulled all eyes toward the entrance. A messenger, breathless and dust-covered, bowed low and presented a sealed scroll. Cleopatra took it without hesitation, breaking the wax with a practiced flick. Her eyes scanned the message, narrowing as the words sank in. "A rebellion," she announced quietly, "has broken out in Cyrenaica. The governor's forces are stretched thin." Antony's jaw clenched. "The Senate's hand is in this. They seek to pull the strings from behind, to fracture our rule." Cleopatra's smile was thin and bitter. "Then we must remind them why Egypt is not so easily broken." She turned away, the weight of her crown settling heavier on her brow. Neferu felt the charged silence wrap around the room like a cloak. Outside, the afternoon light deepened into amber, casting long shadows that crept along the walls. The Queen's words lingered in the air, a promise of storms yet to come. As the day faded into evening, Neferu understood that beneath the silk gowns and golden diadems, beneath the whispered alliances and festive feasts, Cleopatra's court was a crucible where fate itself was forged, and where every servant, every advisor, every foreign envoy was a piece in a game that could change the world forever. The evening descended over Alexandria like a velvet cloak studded with stars, and the palace hummed with the subtle shift from daylight's business to night's conspiracies. Lanterns flickered along the corridors, their flames dancing like captive fireflies, casting wavering shadows that seemed to breathe with a life of their own. The air was heavy with the mingled scents of jasmine, sandalwood, and the faintest hint of burning cedar from the royal hearths. Neferu moved through the palace with the quiet alertness of one who knows that in these hours, whispers travel faster than footsteps and secrets slip through the cracks like water through stone. She found herself drawn once more to the Hall of Anubis, that dark heart of the palace where decisions were weighed like gold on a scale. The door, as before, stood slightly ajar, inviting yet forbidding. She slipped inside, heart hammering, and found Cleopatra seated at the center table, flanked by Antony and the mysterious advisor whose dark eyes gleamed like polished obsidian. The queen's voice was low, threaded with the authority of a ruler who commands not just armies but destinies. "The Senate's hand grows bolder," Cleopatra said, her fingers tracing a line on a detailed map spread before them. "And Cyrenaica's rebellion is only the beginning. We must secure our borders, strengthen our alliances, and prepare for the storm that comes with the rising tide." Antony nodded, his expression grim. "Rome watches us closely. Every move we make is scrutinized." The advisor leaned forward, speaking with a calm precision that belied the tension in the room. "Our spies report increased activity in the eastern provinces. There are whispers of dissent, even among the king's own guards." Cleopatra's eyes narrowed. "Then we must root out the rot before it spreads." She looked up, meeting Neferu's gaze across the room. "You have seen much in your time here, child. Do you understand what it means to serve a queen who walks a razor's edge?" Neferu swallowed hard but nodded. "It means danger is never far, and loyalty must be as sharp as a dagger." The queen smiled, a brief flash of warmth amid the shadows. "Good. Because loyalty is the only shield we have when the world turns against us." The conversation shifted then, weaving through plots and plans like a tightly coiled serpent. Neferu listened as they spoke of couriers crossing deserts under moonlight, of ships slipping through blockades, and of alliances forged in whispered oaths beneath palm trees. As the night deepened, the Hall of Anubis seemed to pulse with the weight of unseen forces, a place where the fate of kingdoms was debated in shadows. When the meeting finally broke, Cleopatra rose, her regal bearing unshaken despite the weight of the news. Antony followed, casting a last glance toward Neferu that spoke of trust and unspoken commands. As the door closed behind them, Neferu remained alone in the half-light, the silence pressing around her like a living thing. Outside, the stars shone cold and indifferent, distant witnesses to the fragile flame of power burning within the palace walls. The dawn seeped slowly into the chambers of the palace, spilling soft light over mosaics that told tales older than the river itself. Neferu awoke to the distant call of a waterbird, the air thick with the scent of baked bread and the faintest trace of lotus petals pressed into linen sheets. The night's meeting in the Hall of Anubis played like a shadowy dance in her mind, the weight of words spoken and the unspoken threads that wove around them. As she dressed quietly in her linen shift, the echo of Cleopatra's gaze lingered, the sharp reminder that to serve here was to live on the edge of peril and power. Iset awaited her in the courtyard, where the morning light filtered through the palms like liquid gold. "Today," Iset said, her voice steady as the Nile, "you will learn to carry more than scrolls and water. You will carry trust." Neferu's heart quickened. They moved through the palace with purpose, weaving past courtiers draped in silks that shimmered like dragonflies, past musicians tuning lutes and pipes in preparation for the day's ceremonies. Their destination was the queen's private chambers, a sanctum where decisions were made far from prying eyes. Inside, Cleopatra awaited, seated beneath a canopy embroidered with stars and serpents, the air fragrant with incense and secrets. The queen's eyes met Neferu's with a gleam that held both challenge and invitation. "You have seen much already," she said, voice low and resonant, "but the path ahead will test you in ways you cannot yet imagine." From a nearby table, she took a small, ornate box carved from ebony and inlaid with mother-of-pearl. "Inside this box," Cleopatra explained, "is a token of my favor. To receive it is to bear my confidence. and the weight it carries. Neferu reached out, her fingers trembling as they closed around the cool wood. The moment felt suspended in time, a bridge between the servant she had been and the role she was about to play. Outside, the palace thrummed with the rhythms of life, footsteps echoing on marble, the murmur of voices, the distant splash of fountains. But within these walls, a different current flowed, one of power, intrigue, and the fragile threads of loyalty woven tight against the gathering storm. As Neferu left the chamber, the ebony box secure in her hands, she understood that her life was no longer her own. It was tied to the queen's fate, bound by secrets whispered in shadow and sealed by the unbreakable will of Cleopatra herself. The days that followed moved with the unhurried rhythm of the Nile itself, steady and relentless. Neferu found herself swept deeper into the currents of the royal court, where every smile could mask a dagger and every whispered word carried the weight of kingdoms. The ebony box, heavy with meaning, was a constant presence at her side, its surface smooth and cool, a secret heartbeat against her palm. The queen's favor was a double-edged blade, granting protection but also marking her as a player in a game where the stakes were life and death. Mornings were spent in the perfumery, where the air bloomed with the scent of jasmine and rose, and where Neferu learned to blend oils that could soothe or seduce, to craft fragrances as layered and mysterious as Cleopatra herself. The women there taught her the language of scent, the subtle dance between sandalwood and myrrh, the sharp bite of citron softened by honeyed neroli. Afternoons brought lessons in reading scrolls and secrets, guided by Izet's keen eyes and quiet wisdom. Neferu's fingers traced the faded ink of diplomatic letters and arcane spells, her mind weaving connections between words and worlds she had never imagined. But it was in the evenings, beneath the shifting glow of oil lamps, that the true heart of the palace revealed itself. Gatherings in the Hall of Anubis became a theatre of shadows, where Cleopatra and Antony plotted their course amid flickering flames and the watchful eyes of advisors who moved like chess pieces across a board. One night, as Neferu poured wine for a circle of courtiers, she caught sight of a man whose presence stirred the room like a sudden gust of wind. He was tall and lean, with eyes dark as obsidian and a smile that could thaw the harshest winter. His name was Ptolemy, a distant cousin of the queen and a master of secrets whispered in the corridors beyond the public eye. He approached Neferu with a nod, his voice low but clear. "The queen's favor is not lightly given, child. It binds you, but it also protects you. Remember that." His words lingered long after he melted back into the crowd, a reminder that in Cleopatra's court, loyalty was currency, and trust was as fragile as the finest glass. As days folded into nights and nights into days, Neferu felt herself changing, no longer merely a servant, but a thread woven into the intricate tapestry of a kingdom on the brink. The scent of jasmine, the rustle of scrolls, the silent weight of the ebony box, all marked the path she walked, a path that led ever deeper into the mysteries of Cleopatra's royal court. The night wrapped the palace in a velvet cloak of stars, each one flickering like a distant promise or a warning. Neferu found herself in the quiet shadows of the eastern terrace, where the city's hum softened to a gentle murmur and the scent of the sea mingled with jasmine and crushed mint. The ebony box rested heavily against her side, its presence a constant reminder of the trust and danger that clung to her like a second skin. She had grown accustomed to the delicate dance of the court, where every glance was measured and every word layered with meaning. But tonight, beneath the cold gaze of the moon, a different rhythm pulsed through the air, a rhythm of secrets waiting to unravel. From the corner of her eye, she spotted Ptolemy stepping out from the labyrinthine corridors, his dark eyes scanning the terrace with the careful calculation of a man who carried more than just words. "You walk a path lined with shadows," he said softly as he approached, his voice low enough to be carried away by the night breeze. Neferu turned to face him, heart quickening yet steady. "And yet the shadows often reveal what daylight hides." Ptolemy smiled, a flash of sharp teeth that seemed almost too human for a man so cloaked in mystery. "Indeed. Cleopatra trusts you with secrets few could bear. But trust in this place is a fickle flame." He gestured toward the city sprawled beneath them, Alexandria's lights flickering like fireflies caught in a jar. Enemies lurk within walls as golden as these, and betrayal wears many faces. Neferu's fingers instinctively tightened around the ebony box. "I do not fear betrayal," she said, voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "I fear only losing myself." Ptolemy's gaze softened, just for a moment. "Then hold on to that fear, for it will be your compass in the days to come." A sudden noise, a distant shout, the clang of metal, pulled their attention toward the palace's inner courtyard. Guards moved swiftly, their armor catching the moonlight in jagged shards. "Trouble," Ptolemy murmured, eyes narrowing. "Always trouble." Before Neferu could respond, the sharp crack of a messenger's horn echoed through the night, a summons swift and urgent. Ptolemy's smile faded.
Come?
"The queen demands your presence." The chambers where Cleopatra waited were cloaked in soft shadows, the flicker of oil lamps casting golden halos on the carved wooden panels and the rich tapestries that whispered stories of gods and kings. The air was heavy with the scent of frankincense and crushed violets, a perfume that seemed to settle over the room like a promise. Neferu entered quietly, the ebony box still cradled in her hands like a fragile heart. Cleopatra sat on a throne draped with silk, her gaze sharp and expectant, the weight of her crown as tangible as the silk folds around her shoulders. "You have come," the queen said, her voice both a welcome and a challenge. "The city stirs, and so must we." She gestured to the scrolls spread across a low table, a tangled web of letters, maps, and coded messages. "The rebellion in Cyrenaica grows bolder. Our enemies believe us distracted, vulnerable. They are mistaken." Antony stood nearby, his expression a storm barely contained. "We need allies, and quickly. Egypt alone cannot withstand Rome's full fury." Cleopatra's eyes gleamed with a fire that seemed to burn through the room. "Then we shall weave alliances as deftly as we weave our words. Trust is a precious currency, and I intend to spend it wisely." She looked directly at Neferu. "You will carry messages that cannot be spoken aloud, carry secrets that must never be written down. Your loyalty will be tested, and your courage." Neferu nodded, feeling the gravity of the task settle upon her like a mantle. Outside, the palace walls stood silent against the night, but within, the pulse of power quickened. Plans unfolded like the delicate petals of a lotus, each movement calculated, each breath measured. As the queen rose, the glow of the lamps caught the gleam of her golden collar and the sparkle of emeralds at her throat. "Prepare yourself," Cleopatra said softly, "for the game is far from over, and the next move belongs to those who dare." Neferu left the chamber with a new purpose, the ebony box a silent witness to the unfolding story, a story of ambition, danger, and the fragile threads that held a kingdom together beneath the watchful eyes of gods and men. The days that followed were charged with a restless urgency, like the distant thunder before a storm breaks. The palace, once a place of quiet intrigue, now pulsed with the clamoring footsteps of couriers bearing urgent scrolls and the muted clang of armored guards preparing for battles not yet spoken aloud. Neferu felt the weight of the ebony box grow heavier, not just from its physical form, but as a symbol of the secrets she now carried deeper within her soul. The alliances Cleopatra forged shimmered like a mirage, beautiful but fragile, promising safety yet threatening to unravel at the slightest misstep. Late one evening, beneath a sky heavy with stars, whispers spread through the halls like wildfire. News had arrived that Octavian's legions were marching ever closer, and the sands of Cyrenaica burned with rebellion stoked by Roman ambition. Cleopatra's court became a hive of fevered plans and desperate gambits, each more daring than the last. Antony, ever the tempest, paced like a lion caged, his voice sharp when discussing war but tender in fleeting moments with the queen. Neferu watched, heart tight, as the dance of politics grew more perilous, each move a step closer to the abyss. The ebony box, once a quiet companion, now seemed to pulse with hidden meanings. Within it lay messages that could turn the tide of empires or doom them to ruin. Neferu found herself summoned to clandestine meetings in shadowed chambers where words were weapons and silence, a shield. Here, loyalty was tested not in the blaze of battle but in the stillness between breaths, where trust could fracture like glass. In these final days, Cleopatra revealed herself not just as a queen of allure but as a master strategist weaving a tapestry of power from threads of wisdom, passion, and iron will. Her eyes, fierce and radiant, bore into those around her, commanding devotion while masking the fragile human heart beneath. She was both goddess and mortal, her court a stage where empires clashed and destinies hung by the slenderest of threads. Neferu's journey mirrored the kingdom's fate, once a servant in the background, now a keeper of secrets, a witness to history's turning wheel. The nights grew colder, the palace corridors more haunted by the echo of footsteps and the weight of unspoken fears. And as the final confrontation loomed, the fragile bonds of love, loyalty, and power were stretched to their breaking point, illuminating the truth that in Cleopatra's world, survival demanded not only courage but the cunning to outwit fate itself. The sun rose blood-red over the city, casting long, fiery shadows across the marble columns and gilded rooftops of Alexandria. The air was thick with tension, every breath heavy as if the very atmosphere held its own secret fears. Neferu moved through the palace corridors with a measured calm, though beneath her composed exterior her heart thrummed like the wings of a startled falcon. News had come that Octavian's legions were on the march, their banners slicing the horizon like blades hungry for conquest. Cleopatra's court had transformed into a battlefield of minds and wills, where every word was weighed and every glance a challenge. Antony's presence was a roaring flame beside the queen's cool fire, his voice booming in council chambers while his eyes softened only when they met hers. The ebony box remained ever at Neferu's side, a silent testament to the burden she bore and the fragile trust bestowed upon her. Late into the night, she found herself summoned once more to the Hall of Anubis, where shadows writhed in the flickering lamplight and the air was heavy with the scent of myrrh and impending fate. Cleopatra's voice was steady, yet carried the undercurrent of steel. "The hour approaches," she said, her eyes never leaving the map that spread before them like a tapestry of war and hope. "We stand at the edge of a knife, and one false step will send us tumbling into oblivion." Antony's fingers drummed a restless rhythm on the table, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "We must be both sword and shield, cunning and strength." The mysterious advisor leaned forward, his voice low and precise. "There are those within our walls who would see us fall, friends who wear masks, and enemies who smile." Neferu listened, the weight of each word settling like stones in her chest. As the council dispersed into the cool night, she remained, her thoughts swirling like desert sands caught in a sudden storm. Outside, the city slept beneath a blanket of stars, unaware of the fragile empire balancing on the edge of war and fate. In that stillness, Neferu understood that the final chapters of Cleopatra's story were being written not with swords alone, but with secrets whispered in shadow and the indomitable will of a queen who dared to defy destiny. The days blurred into nights as Alexandria braced itself beneath a sky heavy with portent. The palace buzzed with restless energy, courtiers and guards alike moving with purpose sharpened by urgency. Neferu's footsteps echoed softly along the marble halls, each one a thread weaving her deeper into the intricate tapestry of intrigue. She carried the ebony box everywhere, its smooth surface a steady weight against her palm, a reminder of the trust Cleopatra had placed in her and the peril that trust entailed. Rumors flared like desert fires, spies in the shadows, loyalties tested, the Senate's armies pressing ever nearer. Cleopatra's once confident smile now bore the subtle shadow of worry, yet her presence remained a beacon of unyielding strength. Antony's fiery temper and strategic mind clashed and harmonized with the queen's own, their alliance a tempest of passion and power that both terrified and inspired those who witnessed it. One evening, beneath a sliver of a crescent moon, Neferu was summoned to the queen's private garden, a secret haven where orange blossoms filled the air with sweetness and the Nile whispered ancient lullabies. Cleopatra awaited her there, draped in a robe of deep violet embroidered with stars, her eyes reflecting the faint shimmer of torchlight. "The moment draws near," Cleopatra said softly, her voice a mixture of resolve and tenderness. "You have proven yourself worthy of the secrets I entrust to you." She reached into the folds of her garment, producing a delicate scroll sealed with crimson wax. "This carries our final plan, a gambit that will either secure our legacy or shatter it forever." Neferu accepted the scroll, feeling the weight of history in her hands. As she looked into the queen's eyes, she knew that the path ahead would demand everything: courage, cunning, and the willingness to face the unknown. The garden seemed to hold its breath around them, a silent witness to the turning tide of an empire's fate. The scroll felt heavier than its slender form should allow, its delicate papyrus cradling the fate of kingdoms as Neferu tucked it carefully beneath her robe. The garden's fragrant night air seemed charged with electricity, every rustle of leaves and distant splash from the fountains magnified in the stillness. Cleopatra's eyes lingered on her with an intensity that burned brighter than any torch, a silent command to carry the burden without falter. As Neferu slipped away into the labyrinthine corridors of the palace, the weight of the secret plan pressed upon her like the Nile's relentless current, pulling her deeper into the unknown. Outside, the city was a mosaic of light and shadow, its streets alive with whispered rumors and unseen eyes. She moved swiftly but cautiously, every step measured, knowing the palace itself held watchers who sought to unravel the threads of loyalty and betrayal. The ebony box at her side felt almost warm, as if it pulsed with the heartbeat of the realm itself. At a hidden alcove near the harbor, Neferu met with a trusted courier cloaked in the plain robes of a merchant. Their brief exchange was a dance of quick glances and coded phrases, the scroll passing silently between them like a whisper on the wind. As the courier vanished into the night, Neferu allowed herself a moment to breathe, the distant call of a nightjar echoing through the cool air. The coming days would demand every ounce of her courage and cunning, but she was no longer merely a servant. She was a keeper of secrets, a thread in the delicate fabric of Cleopatra's legacy. And in the shadows of the palace, where trust was as fleeting as moonlight on water, Neferu understood that survival meant embracing the unknown and facing the darkness with unwavering resolve. The first hints of dawn crept through the latticed windows, casting slender beams of pale gold across the polished marble floors of the palace. Neferu rose silently, the weight of the past days settling deep in her bones like a slow-burning ember. The ebony box lay unopened on the low table, a silent witness to the tides of power that had swept through Cleopatra's court. Outside, the city was stirring, merchants calling out their wares, children laughing in the streets, and the distant clang of smiths at work. But within the palace walls, time seemed to slow, as if holding its breath before the final act. Neferu knew that the moment they had prepared for was at hand. The fragile alliances, the whispered plans, the veiled threats, all converged on the horizon like gathering storm clouds. In the great hall, Cleopatra stood before her council, her posture regal, her eyes steady as the river that had nourished their land for millennia. Antony's presence was a steadfast flame beside her, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword, ready for the inevitable. The air was thick with anticipation and unspoken fears. Neferu felt the pulse of the kingdom beneath her feet, a heartbeat that echoed her own, and in that moment, she understood that their fate was intertwined, as inseparable as the sun and the desert sky. The path forward would be treacherous, lined with sacrifice and shadow, but Cleopatra's spirit blazed like a beacon in the gathering darkness. The final chapters were unfolding, and Neferu was no longer just a witness. She was part of the story, a story of love, power, and the unyielding will to shape destiny itself. The first rays of sunlight spilled like molten gold over the rooftops of Alexandria, setting the city ablaze with warmth and promise. Yet within the palace, a chill lingered, a prelude to the storm that even the brightest dawn could not dispel. Neferu moved through the silent corridors, her footsteps soft but certain, carrying the ebony box close to her heart as though it contained the fragile pulse of a kingdom teetering on the edge. News had come that Octavian's forces were advancing swiftly, their legions carving a path of iron and shadow toward the Nile's fertile banks. The air was thick with tension, each breath weighted with the knowledge that the fate of Egypt hung in delicate balance. Cleopatra met with Antony beneath the soaring pillars of the audience chamber, their voices low but charged with urgency. "We have one chance," she said, her eyes alight with fierce determination, "to outwit the tide and preserve our legacy." Antony's grip tightened on her hand, a silent vow forged in the crucible of impending war. Outside, the city pulsed with a restless energy, its people unaware of the battles being waged in hushed councils and shadowed rooms. Neferu's gaze drifted to the distant horizon, where the sun climbed higher, promising a day that would decide the fate of queens and empires alike. The path ahead was uncertain, carved from the dreams and sacrifices of those who dared to defy destiny. And as the world held its breath, Neferu steeled herself to carry the secrets that could change everything, knowing that in the end, it was courage and cunning that would write the last lines of their story. The days after the battle were thick with a heavy silence, broken only by the quiet murmurs of those who remained. Alexandria's streets bore the scars of conflict. Smoke curled from smoldering buildings, and the once bustling markets were subdued, shadowed by loss and uncertainty. Inside the palace, the mood was somber but resolute. Cleopatra moved among her people with a grace that belied the turmoil beneath her skin, her every step a statement of survival and unyielding will. Neferu, now marked by both the trials of war and the weight of secrets she carried, found herself standing closer to the heart of power than ever before. She witnessed the delicate balancing act of politics as Cleopatra negotiated with foreign envoys, her words weaving promises and threats with equal finesse. Antony, wounded but unbowed, strategized tirelessly, his fiery spirit a beacon of hope amid the gathering storm clouds. As the queen prepared to face the new dawn, one shaped by uncertain alliances and shifting loyalties. Neferu understood that the true battle was not only on the field but within the fragile web of trust, ambition, and destiny that bound them all. The story of Cleopatra's court was far from over. It was evolving, deeper and more complex than any scroll could capture, a living testament to the courage and cunning required to rule amidst chaos. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of crimson and gold, as Alexandria's once vibrant harbor lay quiet beneath a heavy, expectant hush. Neferu moved through the palace with purposeful steps, each corridor echoing with memories of whispered plots and fierce declarations. The ebony box she carried felt heavier than ever, a silent reminder that the fragile peace Cleopatra fought to maintain was balanced on the edge of a razor blade. Cleopatra stood on the palace terrace, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the sea met the sky in a shimmering embrace. Her expression was a mask of serene resolve, but Neferu saw the flicker of doubt that danced like a shadow in her emerald eyes. Antony joined her, his hand warm as it found hers, a brief touch that spoke volumes of partnership forged in fire and blood. "The sands shift beneath our feet," Cleopatra murmured, voice steady but laced with unspoken fears. "But we must stand firm, for the sake of Egypt's soul." Below them, the city pulsed with life, its people resilient in the face of uncertainty. Neferu knew that the coming days would test every bond, every secret, every breath. The story of Cleopatra's royal court was weaving its final threads, a tapestry rich with triumph and tragedy, passion and betrayal. And as night deepened, she vowed to carry that story forward, a keeper of memories etched in the very stones of Alexandria, where history and legend danced forever entwined. The palace grew quieter as night deepened, the flickering of torches casting elongated shadows that seemed to stretch like silent witnesses along the walls. Neferu sat alone in a small chamber, the ebony box open before her, revealing delicate scrolls sealed with the queen's signet. Each contained instructions, secrets, and pleas, a web of responsibilities now firmly woven into her soul. Outside, the distant murmur of the Nile whispered ancient songs, a timeless lullaby to a city caught between glory and decline. Neferu traced the delicate calligraphy, feeling the weight of history pressing down with every stroke. Cleopatra's vision had been bold and brilliant, a dance on the edge of fate, but the tides of power were cruel and unforgiving. The bond between Cleopatra and Antony, once the very heartbeat of the realm, strained under the pressure of shifting loyalties and relentless enemies. Yet amid the uncertainty, there remained a fierce light, a testament to a queen who refused to yield. Neferu closed the scrolls gently, her heart heavy but resolute. She understood now that stories were not merely told, they were lived, breathed, and carried forward by those who dared to remember. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the echoes of Cleopatra's court lingered like a song, haunting and eternal, forever etched in the sands of time. In the shimmering heart of Alexandria, where the Nile's slow whisper met the pulse of empire, Cleopatra ruled with a blend of fierce intellect and magnetic grace that captivated both allies and adversaries alike. Through the eyes of Neferu, a servant turned secret keeper, we journeyed into the labyrinthine corridors of power, where every smile could hide a dagger and every whispered word bore the weight of kingdoms. The ebony box, a silent emblem of trust and peril, traveled alongside Neferu as she navigated a court alive with intrigue, perfumed with jasmine and thick with the scent of ambition. Cleopatra's alliance with Antony burned like a tempest, a force of passion and strategy against the looming shadow of Rome's growing might. We saw the palace awaken to the threat of rebellion and war, the delicate dance of alliances spun beneath flickering torchlight, and the mounting tension that set hearts racing like the wings of startled falcons. Battles raged not only on distant fields but within the halls, where loyalty was tested in silence and secrets became the sharpest weapons. Amid it all, Cleopatra stood unbowed, a queen weaving destinies with wisdom, strength, and an unyielding will to defy fate itself. The story traced the triumphs and trials, the whispered plots and the searing moments of courage, revealing a court alive with color, sound, and shadow. As the final chapters unfolded beneath blood-red skies and quiet dawns, Neferu's journey mirrored the kingdom's fate, transforming from a silent observer to a vital thread in the tapestry of history. The legacy of Cleopatra's royal court, rich with love, power, sacrifice, and resilience, lingers still, etched in the very stones of Alexandria and whispered by the eternal Nile, a timeless tale of a queen who dared to challenge the gods and carve her name into the endless river of time. Cleopatra's royal court was a realm where the shimmering splendor of ancient Egypt met the perilous dance of power and ambition. It was a world steeped in beauty and danger, where every gesture carried meaning, every glance concealed intent, and every alliance was forged with both passion and calculation. Within these walls, Cleopatra ruled not merely as a queen, but as a force of nature, unyielding, brilliant, and profoundly human. Her story, as seen through the eyes of those who served her and stood beside her, reveals a tapestry woven from the brightest threads of love, loyalty, and fierce determination, alongside the darkest shadows of betrayal, intrigue, and loss. The court itself was a living entity, pulsing with the rhythms of whispered secrets, fragrant oils, and the constant undercurrent of political maneuvering. Cleopatra's relationship with Antony was both a flame of hope and a tempest that stirred the fate of empires, intertwining personal desire with the harsh realities of war and survival. Through the eyes of Neferu, a humble servant transformed into a keeper of secrets, we glimpse the intimate and the monumental, the quiet moments of vulnerability alongside the thunderous calls to battle. As the tides of history surged forward, the palace bore witness to the fragility of power and the resilience of the human spirit. The alliances Cleopatra forged, the sacrifices made, and the unyielding courage displayed paint a portrait not only of a queen but of an era defined by its relentless struggle between light and shadow. Though the sands of time would eventually swallow the glories and tragedies of her reign, the legacy of Cleopatra's royal court endures, immortalized in the echoes of the Nile and the hearts of those who dare to remember. Her story stands as a timeless testament to the enduring complexity of leadership and the indomitable will to shape one's destiny, reminding us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the spark of ambition and the fire of courage can illuminate the darkest chapters of history, leaving a legacy that burns eternal. Welcome to the Sleepy Scribe. Your endless internet wandering has brought you here, and hopefully you can finally sleep to today's topic. Now, before we begin, comment where you are listening from, and how late it is where you are. It is so very interesting to see how far and wide people come to listen. Lastly, if you enjoy these videos, please subscribe, it would be very appreciated. Now, let us begin. In the gentle twilight of Tudor England, a kingdom poised between the old and the new, a boy was born who would come to shape the very destiny of a nation with his desires, his fury, and his unyielding will. This was Henry Tudor, who would ascend as King Henry, a monarch whose love life was as tempestuous and grand as the roaring seas and whose every affection stirred the courts, whispered in halls, and echoed through history itself. Imagine a sprawling palace, its stone walls heavy with secrets, tapestries rich with embroidered tales, and candlelight flickering over faces both eager and cautious, where courtiers jostled for favor like ships seeking harbor in a storm. Here, amidst velvet and gold, Henry's story began, not just as a ruler, but as a man tangled in passion, power, and betrayal. Henry was no ordinary prince. Tall and broad, with a manet of fiery auburn hair that caught the light like a flame, he carried himself with the confidence of a lion prowling his domain. His laugh could fill a room, warm and inviting, yet beneath it lurked the restless hunger of a soul seeking something more than crowns and scepters. The boy grew to embody the Renaissance ideal, a skilled jouster, a master musician, a lover of fine art and even finer company. Yet, as dawn follows dusk, beneath the glittering surface, the shadows of his desires began to deepen, foretelling the storms ahead. His first great love was Catherine of Aragon, a woman of noble blood and resolute spirit, whose quiet grace and dignity captured the young king's heart and steadied the turbulent court. Their marriage was a union of politics and passion, forged to cement alliances and bring peace between kingdoms. Yet it was also a love story whispered through the corridors, filled with tender moments beneath vaulted ceilings and promises made under the watchful eyes of stars. But even the strongest vows can fray under the weight of time and expectation, and Catherine's inability to provide Henry with a male heir planted the first seeds of doubt, a shadow stretching slowly across their gilded marriage. Picture now the royal chambers, heavy drapes drawn to shield the lovers from prying eyes, the scent of rosewater mingling with the faint tang of burning wood. Henry, eager and restless, sought comfort and certainty in Catherine's arms, only to be met with the cruel silence of empty beds and whispered prayers. His frustration grew, a tempest barely contained behind his regal mask, for in those years, a son was not just a blessing but a necessity, a lifeline for a dynasty that trembled on the edge of uncertainty. The court buzzed with rumors, whispers slipping like silk through the fingers of nobles and servants alike, of Henry's growing impatience and the rise of a new figure whose very name would ignite the flames of scandal and change. Anne Boleyn, a lady-in-waiting with sharp wit and eyes that sparkled with defiance, stepped into Henry's life like a sudden storm, sweeping away the remnants of old promises. Her laughter was a song that echoed in the king's ears, her presence a challenge to the established order. She was no meek consort but a woman of ambition and cunning, whose charm held the power to both enchant and unsettle. Their courtship was a delicate dance of stolen glances, secret letters folded with care, and whispered declarations beneath the arches of royal gardens where the scent of blooming jasmine filled the air with promise and peril. Yet this dance carried a price, for to pursue and meant defying not just Catherine but the very church itself, and the repercussions would ripple far beyond the palace walls. The kingdom stood on the brink of upheaval, the quiet hum of religious dissent stirring beneath the surface as Henry sought a way to dissolve his marriage, igniting a firestorm of political and spiritual turmoil. The Pope's refusal to annul the union forced Henry's hand, leading him down a path that fractured Christendom and birthed the Church of England, a schism born from desire as much as doctrine. It was a bold gambit, one that crowned Henry not only as a king of flesh and blood but as the supreme head of the Church, intertwining his personal lust with the fate of millions. Within these turbulent times, love, power, and faith collided, weaving a tapestry as complex and vivid as the stained glass windows that caught the morning sun in the chapel of Westminster. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the castle battlements, Henry's court prepared for a wedding unlike any other, a ceremony that would seal a new chapter of passion and peril. Anne Boleyn, radiant and resolute, ascended the steps to meet her king, her eyes glinting with both hope and the fierce knowledge of the dangers ahead. The halls whispered with anticipation, the air thick with secrets and silent prayers, for all who watched knew this was no ordinary union but the fulcrum upon which history would pivot. In that moment, beneath the vaulted ceilings and golden chandeliers, the stage was set for a saga of love and betrayal that would echo through the ages, a story as intoxicating and unpredictable as the man who ruled the land. Would Henry's heart find the solace it sought, or would the shadows of ambition and jealousy tear apart all he held dear? The tale had only just begun, and as the night deepened, the kingdom held its breath, poised on the edge of desire and destiny, awaiting the next chapter in the scandalous life of King Henry. As dawn stretched its pale fingers across the sky, the castle stirred with restless energy, the echoes of the previous night's promises and whispered schemes still lingering like the soft scent of lingering incense. Henry, now crowned not just by the crown but by his own will as head of church and state, found himself walking a narrow path between ecstasy and peril. Anne Boleyn, with her fiery spirit and sharp mind, was no mere consort. She was a queen in her own right, a storm wrapped in silk and diamonds, whose ambition burned as brightly as Henry's own. Their union, born of desire and defiance, was a symbol of transformation, a declaration that the old world was giving way to a new order where love and power danced in dangerously intricate steps. Yet, beneath the shimmering surface of courtly pageantry, darker shadows gathered. Anne's inability, or perhaps unwillingness, to produce the longed-for male heir cast ripples of doubt and unrest. Court whispers turned to murmurs of conspiracy, and Henry's once boundless passion showed signs of fraying like the edges of a treasured tapestry caught in a storm. Imagine the royal chambers where the king paced, his heavy boots muffled by plush rugs, his face a mask of frustration and longing, as Anne sat poised by the window, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the cool glass, eyes distant yet fierce. The tension between them was a tempest held at bay by etiquette and obligation, but it threatened to break free in thunderous waves. Into this charged atmosphere stepped Jane Seymour, a lady whose quiet beauty and gentle demeanor offered a stark contrast to Anne's fiery blaze. Jane was like a soft breeze on a scorching day, a whisper of calm in a world turned chaotic. Her smile, shy yet sincere, caught Henry's eye and stirred in him a yearning for peace, for the kind of steady affection that might soothe the restless king's soul. Their encounters were woven with moments of laughter and gentle touches, a balm to wounds carved by ambition and heartbreak. But Henry's court was a battlefield where love and power clashed ceaselessly, and Jane's rise did not go unnoticed. And, aware of the shifting tides, played her role with a mixture of grace and steel, masking fear beneath a veneer of regal composure. The courtiers, those ever-watchful shadows, whispered rumors like falling leaves in autumn winds, speculations that fueled rivalries and hardened alliances. As Henry's affections turned increasingly toward Jane, the fractures in his marriage with Anne widened. The Queen's fate became a question whispered in darkened corridors and behind closed doors, a secret carried on the breath of servants and nobles alike. The air thickened with a sense of impending doom, as if the very stones of the palace held their breath. The great hall, where once joyous celebrations had filled the air with music and mirth, now echoed with hushed conversations and wary glances. Henry's relentless quest for a son, a symbol of divine favor and dynastic security, cast a long shadow over every gathering. Then came the moment when the fragile balance shattered. Anne Boleyn, once the beloved and bold queen, was arrested on charges of adultery, incest, and treason, accusations that many believed to be fabrications born of jealousy and political maneuvering. Her trial, a spectacle of spectacle, exposed the raw underbelly of Tudor power, where love was weaponized and betrayal writ large on the canvas of the kingdom. The corridors that had echoed with her laughter now held silence heavy with sorrow and fear. Henry, torn between love, duty, and his insatiable hunger for a male heir, watched as Anne's life unraveled like a tapestry snagged and torn. Her final days were filled with courage and despair, her voice a whispered defiance against the fate imposed upon her. And so, beneath the cold gaze of the executioner's block, Anne's story reached its tragic crescendo. A moment that would haunt Henry and the kingdom forever, a dark stain upon a reign marked by passion and ruthlessness. But the wheel of fate turned relentlessly onward. From the ashes of scandal and loss rose Jane Seymour, whose gentle strength promised the son Henry so desperately desired. The kingdom held its breath once more, awaiting the arrival of the future king, while beneath the surface, the intricate dance of love, power, and betrayal continued, an endless story woven into the very fabric of Tudor England. In the quiet hush of early morning, long before the court stirred and the first beams of sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, the palace whispered secrets of hope and sorrow. Jane Seymour, with her pale complexion and soft brown eyes, moved through the halls like a gentle breeze, unassuming yet resolute, carrying with her the fragile promise of a future that Henry craved more than gold or glory. Unlike the fiery Anne Boleyn, Jane was the embodiment of patience and quiet strength, a balm to a king whose heart had been scorched by passion and betrayal. Their union was less a tempest and more a gentle tide, washing over the tumultuous years with a steady, calming rhythm that spoke of the healing power of love unadorned by drama or spectacle. Henry, who had once roared with desire and fury, found in Jane a companion whose calm demeanor softened the sharp edges of his courtly life, offering a sanctuary from the storm that was his reign. Yet even in this peaceful interlude, the ever-turning wheel of fate refused to pause. The long-awaited heir arrived, a son named Edward, whose cry filled the chambers with a joy that seemed to momentarily quiet the restless spirits of the palace. His birth was a victory not only for Henry's dynastic ambitions, but for the fragile hopes of a kingdom caught between old faith and new order. The infant prince's tiny fingers curled around the future, a symbol of promise wrapped in swaddling clothes and dreams. But joy, like the flickering candlelight in the vast halls, was fragile and fleeting. Jane's delicate health waned as swiftly as the seasons changed, and the palace soon held its breath in mourning. Her death, following the birth of Prince Edward, cast a pall over the court, a sorrow so deep it seemed to echo in every stone and shadow. Henry's grief was a storm held just beneath the surface, a raw wound covered by regal composure but known to those close enough to see the flicker of pain behind his eyes. Yet even as the king mourned, the relentless currents of politics and passion surged forward. The court, a living, breathing organism of ambition and desire, quickly refocused on the future, on new alliances, new marriages, and new battles for power cloaked in silk and whispered promises. Enter Anne of Cleves, a woman whose arrival was heralded with hope and calculated diplomacy, a union designed not for passion but for political alliance. She was a stranger to Henry, a foreign princess whose portrait had been painted with flattering strokes but whose reality fell short of the king's expectations. Their marriage, cold and awkward, was a far cry from the fiery passion of past queens. Henry's disappointment was palpable, his famously blunt words cutting through the court like a winter chill. "I like her not," he declared, turning his back on the marriage that was supposed to secure peace between kingdoms. The annulment came swiftly, a reminder that in Henry's world, love was never far from politics, and neither was betrayal. Anne of Cleves, spared the fate of some of Henry's other wives, was granted a generous settlement and the curious title of the king's sister, living out her days in relative comfort but far from the throne. Yet, Henry's restless heart would not be stilled. His gaze soon turned to Catherine Howard, a young and vivacious cousin of Anne Boleyn, whose youth and beauty rekindled the king's desires. Catherine was like a breath of spring after a harsh winter, her laughter light and intoxicating, her spirit wild and untamed. The court buzzed with excitement and caution, aware that such passions often carried dangerous consequences. But the heady romance was built on fragile foundations. Catherine's past, a tapestry woven with secrets and youthful indiscretions, began to unravel under the relentless scrutiny of the Tudor court. The king's favour, once lavished with affection, cooled as whispers of betrayal grew louder. The scandal that followed was swift and brutal, a stark reminder that in Henry's England, love was entwined with power, and betrayal was met with a blade's cold finality. Catherine's downfall, like Anne Boleyn's before her, was a cautionary tale of desire and danger, a chapter in the endless story of a king whose heart was as tumultuous as the seas that battered the English coast. Yet even as the shadows lengthened over the palace and the echoes of loss reverberated through the corridors, the story of Henry's love affairs continued, a vivid tapestry of passion, power, and betrayal that wove together the fate of a man and a nation. The heavy wooden doors of Hampton Court creaked open with a sound that seemed to echo through the endless halls, carrying with it the footsteps of a man whose very presence commanded attention and dread in equal measure. Henry VIII, now well into his reign and the fuller weight of years and experiences, bore the marks of a king hardened by passion, betrayal, and the relentless demands of power. His once fiery auburn hair had begun to darken and recede, but his eyes still burned with that unmistakable intensity, a spark of desire and iron will that refused to be dimmed. His frame, once lithe and athletic, had grown broad and imposing, a physical manifestation of the immense burdens he carried as monarch, lover, and lawmaker. Behind him trailed a court as vibrant and volatile as the man himself, a swirling mix of nobles, ladies, jesters, and schemers, each playing their parts on a stage that stretched from the grandest halls to the whispered shadows beyond. The year was now well into the 1540s, a time when the tides of change were sweeping through England with an unstoppable force, and Henry's personal life continued to unfold like a richly embroidered drama, dense with intrigue and delicate balances of power. After the tragic demise of Catherine Howard, Henry found himself once again caught in the web of companionship and longing, though now tempered by experience and a wary heart. His next marriage was to Catherine Parr, a woman whose intellect and gentle nature brought a semblance of peace and stability that had been elusive in years past. Catherine Parr was unlike the previous queens. She was a scholar and a caregiver, tending not only to Henry's physical ailments as he grew older and less vigorous, but also to the spiritual and emotional scars carved by decades of love and loss. Their relationship was marked by respect and companionship, a quieter kind of affection that, while lacking the fiery passion of earlier days, provided a vital refuge amid the tempest of court politics. Picture the two of them walking through the palace gardens at twilight, the soft glow of lanterns illuminating their path as they discuss matters of theology and governance, their voices low and thoughtful, weaving together threads of faith and pragmatism. Catherine's influence extended beyond the personal, as she encouraged Henry to reconcile with his daughters and fostered an environment where the fractured family could find moments of fragile unity. Yet the shadows of the past clung stubbornly to Henry's court. The ghosts of his former wives lingered like faint echoes in the corridors, and Boleyn's defiant spirit whispered in the laughter of children. Catherine Howard's youthful beauty remained a bittersweet memory etched in portraits and song. Henry himself wrestled with the weight of his legacy, the knowledge that his passions had carved a path lined with both triumph and tragedy. The once vibrant king, whose laughter had filled grand halls and whose desires had reshaped a nation's destiny, now faced the twilight of his reign with a mixture of regret and acceptance. Still, even as his strength waned and his temper grew more unpredictable, Henry remained a figure of awe and fear, a man who had forever altered the course of English history through his relentless pursuit of love and power. As the castle settled into the hush of night, and the flickering candlelight cast long shadows on tapestries depicting ancient kings and battles, the story of Henry VIII continued to unfold, a tale of passion and betrayal, ambition and loss, woven into the very fabric of a kingdom whose fate was inseparable from the man who ruled it. The tapestry of Henry's reign was stitched not only with grand political upheavals and seismic religious shifts, but with the intimate, tangled threads of love and desire that colored every corner of his world. Among the court's whispered tales, none captivated hearts and minds quite like the passionate and perilous romance of Anne Boleyn, whose rise and fall read like a tempestuous ballad sung beneath the moonlit sky. To understand Anne is to picture a woman of uncommon intelligence and fierce ambition, with eyes like glinting obsidian that could charm the most stoic noble and a tongue sharpened by wit and determination. She was a storm wrapped in finery, her presence a blaze of color in a world often painted with the muted hues of duty and decorum. Born into a noble family, Anne's education in the courts of France and the Netherlands had polished her into a jewel of refinement and intrigue, her letters a dance of clever language and subtle defiance. When Anne stepped into the English court, she brought with her not only beauty but a spark that ignited the king's restless heart. Their courtship was no simple affair of exchanged glances and stolen moments. It was a complex game of power and passion, a dance on a razor's edge where each step could lead to triumph or ruin. Imagine the secret meetings in shadowed corridors, the soft rustle of silk dresses and the quickened heartbeat beneath the watchful eyes of loyal courtiers. Anne, aware of the dangers, wielded her influence like a finely honed blade, drawing Henry deeper into a web of desire and defiance. Their love was as much a battle as a romance, each testing the limits of loyalty and ambition. The tension culminated in Henry's break with the Catholic Church, a seismic event that rocked Europe and redefined the very soul of England. The king's determination to marry Anne and secure a male heir led to the creation of the Church of England, severing ties with Rome and setting a precedent for royal supremacy that would echo through centuries. Yet, even as Anne was crowned queen amid the fanfare and glitter, her fate was precarious. The court's intrigue was a serpent coiled beneath the velvet cushions of the throne room, ready to strike. Anne's inability to produce a surviving male heir, coupled with enemies who whispered venomous lies, sowed the seeds of her downfall. The charges leveled against her, adultery, incest, treason, were as much political machinations as truths, a tragic culmination of a saga where love and power collided with devastating consequence. In the shadowed chambers where her fate was sealed, Anne met her end with a grace that transcended the cruelty of her sentence. Her final moments a poignant testament to a woman who dared to challenge the tides of history. Yet, in the aftermath of Anne's fall, the court did not rest. The cycle of desire, betrayal, and political calculation spun on, weaving new stories of love and ambition that continued to shape the destiny of England and the legacy of its most notorious king. With Anne Boleyn's tragic fall still casting long shadows over the court, Henry's heart and the kingdom's fate seemed suspended in a fragile balance, as if caught between the roaring thunder of past passions and the uncertain calm of what was yet to come. The silence that followed was broken gently by the soft footsteps and quiet presence of Jane Seymour, whose arrival felt like the first light of dawn after a long, storm-ridden night. Jane was the embodiment of serene grace, her pale skin almost luminous beneath the heavy tapestries of the royal chambers, her eyes steady pools of calm that offered Henry a respite from the tempest that had defined his reign. She was unlike any woman who had come before her, not a firebrand nor a schemer, but a tender soul whose quiet strength could soothe the restless king's turbulent spirit. Their courtship unfolded not in grand proclamations or dramatic gestures but in moments of subtle understanding. Shared glances across candlelit tables, gentle words exchanged in the hushed corridors, and the steady beat of companionship that promised healing and hope. Jane's presence was a balm to Henry's bruised heart, her unwavering loyalty a steady anchor in a sea of uncertainty. When she bore him a son, Edward, the joy that blossomed within the palace walls was as profound as it was fragile, a beacon of promise that seemed to momentarily still the restless tides of fate. Yet the happiness was tempered by Jane's delicate health, a cruel reminder that even the brightest light could flicker and fade. Her death in the days following Edward's birth left Henry bereft, his grief a deep and aching wound that no crown or scepter could soothe. The court mourned with a solemnity that filled the halls with a heavy silence, the echoes of Jane's gentle laughter and quiet strength lingering like a soft refrain in the memories of those who had loved her. The halls of Hampton Court, once alive with the bright laughter of youthful Catherine Howard, grew heavy with the silence of mourning and caution. Henry, now older, his face marked by the wear of years and the weight of crown and consequence, stood amidst the flickering candlelight, a man who had loved fiercely and lost even more. His once broad and commanding frame had thickened, the vitality of his youth tempered by the harsh realities of kingship and a body ravaged by ailments that crept like shadows in the dark. Yet beneath the surface, the king's heart still beat with an unyielding hunger, not just for power, but for companionship, for that elusive connection that had so often slipped through his fingers like sand. Into this quieter, more somber chapter of his life stepped Catherine Parr, a woman whose intelligence and strength would come to both soothe and challenge the aging monarch. She was a learned woman, fluent in Latin and versed in the religious and philosophical debates that roiled England, a steady flame of reason in a court often consumed by chaos and intrigue. Their marriage was unlike any Henry had known, less a tempestuous storm, more a carefully tended hearth, providing warmth and light in the long, dark winters of his final years. Catherine's role went beyond that of wife. She became a nurse to Henry's failing body and a guardian of his fractured family, navigating the treacherous waters of court politics with a grace that won the respect of nobles and commoners alike. Together, They forged a partnership that balanced affection with pragmatism, a union where intellect met desire and duty entwined with compassion. Yet, even as Henry found solace in Catherine's presence, the court remained a stage where ambition and rivalry played out with ruthless precision. The ghosts of past queens lingered still, their stories whispered in the corridors and etched into the stone walls, a constant reminder that love and power in Tudor England were inseparable and often deadly companions. As the years waned, Henry's health declined, and the once vibrant king who had shaped a nation with his passions and decrees became a figure both revered and pitied, a man whose legacy was as tangled and tumultuous as the love affairs that had defined his reign. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the tapestries depicting battles and coronations, silent witnesses to a life lived at the intersection of desire and destiny, a story woven into the very fabric of England's history and whispered through the ages like a bedtime tale both haunting and unforgettable. The chill of late autumn wrapped itself around the stone walls of Hampton Court as Henry VIII, now a king burdened by years and ailments, sat wrapped in heavy velvet robes that did little to shield him from the growing cold both outside and within. His breath came in shallow gasps, the weight of his body pressing down upon a throne that once felt light beneath his youthful vigor. The court buzzed around him with hushed voices and anxious glances, courtiers and servants alike treading softly as if their very steps might shatter the fragile king's remaining strength. Yet even as his body weakened, Henry's mind remained sharp, flickering with memories of fiery loves and fierce battles, both on the field and in the chambers of his heart. The faces of his 6 wives floated before him like ghostly apparitions, Catherine of Aragon, steadfast and dignified, and Boleyn, fiery and tragic, Jane Seymour, gentle and beloved, and of Cleves, distant and diplomatic, Catherine Howard, youthful and doomed, and Catherine Parr, wise and devoted. Each had left a mark upon him, their stories entwined with his own in a tapestry as complex and colourful as the stained glass that caught the dying light of day. In these final days, Henry's thoughts often turned not to the throne or the wars he had waged, but to his children, the fragile hope of the Tudor legacy. Edward, young and crowned in his stead; Mary, fierce and determined; Elizabeth, bright and enigmatic. Their futures were a puzzle Henry could not fully solve, a kingdom poised precariously on the edge of change and uncertainty. The great halls echoed faintly with the distant sound of a lute, a melancholy melody that seemed to weave through the air like a whispered farewell. Catherine Parr sat nearby, reading softly from a book of prayers, her presence a quiet comfort in the turbulent sea of Henry's fading days. She spoke to him not just as a queen, but as a companion who understood the heavy crown of duty and the loneliness that came with it. Outside, the gardens lay shrouded in mist, the vibrant blooms of spring long gone, replaced by the bare branches and fallen leaves that spoke of endings and new beginnings. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a final golden glow over the palace, Henry's thoughts drifted toward the unknown. What legacy he would leave, what tales would be told of his reign, and whether the love and betrayal that had so defined his life would be remembered as tragedy or triumph. The candlelight flickered low, shadows danced across the stone walls, and the great story of King Henry VIII moved quietly toward its close, a tale as vivid and unforgettable as the man himself. The dawn crept slowly over the horizon, spilling soft light into the chambers where Henry VIII lay in a vast bed draped with crimson and gold, the colours once symbols of power now muted by time and illness. The king's breath came in shallow whispers, each one a fragile thread tying him to the world he had ruled with such fiery passion. Around him, the court gathered in quiet reverence, faces etched with the mixture of hope and sorrow that comes when the final chapter of a great life nears its end. Among them were his children, Edward, the young prince who would soon wear the crown; Mary, a woman hardened by exile and faith; and Elizabeth, bright-eyed and sharp-witted, whose future held the promise of a new dawn for England. The tapestry of Henry's reign, woven with threads of love, betrayal, ambition, and faith, seemed to shimmer in the fading light, each story a vivid thread in the grand design of history. As his strength waned, Henry's thoughts wandered back through the years, the vibrant gardens of his youth, the fierce battles on horseback, the intoxicating laughter of Anne Boleyn, the gentle touch of Jane Seymour, the distant smile of Anne of Cleves, the fleeting joy of Catherine Howard, and the steadfast companionship of Catherine Parr. Each memory was a star in the night sky of his mind, shining with its own light and casting shadows that danced just beyond reach. The court physicians, wary yet hopeful, tended to the king with the best knowledge of their time, their remedies a blend of herbs and prayers, their faces solemn beneath powdered wigs and embroidered robes. Outside, the heavy oak doors closed softly against the murmurs of a world waiting beyond the palace walls, a kingdom poised on the cusp of change. Henry's final hours were marked not by the roar of battle or the clamour of court intrigue, but by a quiet dignity, a moment suspended between the mortal and the eternal. As the last flicker of candlelight danced upon the tapestry of saints and kings, the great story of Henry VIII, the lover, the ruler, the man, was drawing to a close, leaving behind a legacy as complex and unforgettable as the man himself. The kingdom stirred with restless energy as word spread that Henry's days were drawing near their end. The grand halls of the palace, once vibrant with music, laughter, and the sharp clash of courtly debate, now echoed with the soft murmur of prayers and anxious whispers. Nobles and servants alike moved carefully through the corridors, each step measured, each glance heavy with unspoken fears. Outside the windows, the gardens lay cloaked in the muted hues of late autumn, leaves swirling like forgotten memories across the stone paths where Henry had once strode with unshakable confidence. His children gathered near, the young Edward, soon to ascend the throne, his face a blend of youthful determination and the heavy burden of legacy. Mary, whose fiery spirit bore the scars of exile and religious strife, and Elizabeth, sharp-witted and watchful, her future yet unwritten but radiant with possibility. Amidst them stood Catherine, steady and compassionate, a final beacon of solace for a king whose life had been marked by passion and turmoil. As Henry's breath grew faint, his mind drifted through the corridors of memory, the grand feasts where alliances were forged and broken, the whispered secrets behind velvet curtains, the intoxicating blend of love and danger that had shaped his reign. He thought of the women who had walked beside him on this turbulent journey, the loyal Catherine, the fiery and the gentle Jane, the diplomatic and the youthful Catherine, and the wise Catherine. Each had left an indelible mark upon his heart and upon history, their stories intertwined with his own in a tapestry as rich and complex as the realm he ruled. Outside, the sky blushed with the first light of dawn, casting a gentle glow over a kingdom poised on the brink of transformation. Henry's final moments were a quiet surrender to the inevitable, a closing of the eyes heavy with the weight of a lifetime lived at the crossroads of love, power, and destiny. And as the world held its breath, the great tale of Henry's life moved forward, its echoes carried on the winds of time, whispered in the corridors of history, a story never truly ending but forever unfolding. The vast kingdom Henry ruled was held in a fragile balance as the final vestiges of his breath mingled with the cold morning air. Beyond the heavy oak doors of his chamber, courtiers gathered in solemn clusters, their faces masks of loyalty strained by the weight of uncertainty. The sun rose slowly over the English countryside, painting the sky with hues of gold and rose, an ironic contrast to the somber mood that gripped the palace. Inside, the tapestry of Henry's life, woven with passion, power, betrayal, and devotion, seemed to hang suspended in the heavy silence. The memories that danced behind Henry's closed eyes were as vivid as ever. The first time he clasped the hand of Catherine of Aragon, her eyes steady and unwavering, the soft cadence of her voice promising alliance and stability in a world rife with unrest. The intoxicating, dangerous allure of Anne Boleyn, the flick of her dark hair, the sharpness of her wit, and the way she challenged him like a tempest daring the calm sea to roar. Jane Seymour's gentle touch, a balm to the restless king's soul, her quiet strength offering a fleeting glimpse of peace amid the swirling storm of his reign. And of Cleves, whose presence was a discordant note in the symphony of his life, a reminder of politics' cold grip on even the most intimate affairs. Catherine Howard's bright laughter, as fragile and fleeting as a summer breeze, a youthful flame extinguished all too soon by betrayal and courtly cruelty. And Catherine Parr, whose wisdom and steadfastness in these final years had become a tether to the world Henry was about to leave behind. The walls of the chamber seemed to breathe with these memories, the portraits of long-gone monarchs watching silently as Henry's spirit teetered on the edge of eternity. Outside, the future waited in the form of his children, Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, each bearing the hopes and fears of a nation divided by faith and ambition. Edward, the boy king in waiting, carried the heavy mantle of Protestant reform, his reign destined to reshape England in ways even his father could not fully foresee. Mary, fierce and devout, would later fight to restore the old faith, her fiery heart a force both revered and feared. Elizabeth, sharp and cunning, would rise like a phoenix from the ashes of turmoil to claim a throne that demanded both grace and steel. In this moment of quiet between life and death, Henry's thoughts flickered to these heirs, to the legacy of love and war, of devotion and betrayal that he would leave behind. The heavy silence was broken by the soft footsteps of Catherine Parr, who knelt by the bedside, her hand gently clasping Henry's weathered fingers. Her voice, steady and comforting, spoke words of faith and hope, bridging the chasm between mortal fear and divine promise. The court held its collective breath as the king's final moments unfolded, a poignant close to a reign that had shaped the course of history. As Henry's eyes fluttered open one last time, a flicker of clarity passed through them, an unspoken farewell to a world forever changed by his desires and deeds. And then, as the light of morning bathed the chamber, the great story of Henry's life reached a turning point, not an end, but a passage, a bridge to the turbulent yet hopeful chapters that awaited England in the days to come. Before the heavy weight of the crown settled fully upon Henry's broad shoulders, his youth unfolded like a vivid tapestry of exuberance, ambition, and the intoxicating thrill of newfound power. Born into the turbulent era of late medieval England, Henry grew up surrounded by towering stone castles, lush hunting grounds, and the echoing clang of armored knights preparing for battle. His early days were filled with lessons in swordsmanship, classical literature, and the intricate dance of courtly manners, a world where every gesture carried meaning and every word could shift the fate of men and kingdoms. Imagine the young Henry as a bright flame burning with restless energy, his laughter ringing out over the rolling green fields as he raced horses under the open sky, his fiery hair catching the sunlight like threads of molten gold. He was a prince molded by expectation yet brimming with a personal hunger for greatness, a desire to carve his name deep into the annals of history. Among his earliest loves was Catherine of Aragon, daughter of the Spanish monarchs and a woman whose grace and steadfastness would become both a comfort and a source of conflict. Their marriage, arranged to cement alliances and secure peace, was initially marked by genuine affection, tender moments hidden beneath layers of political strategy. Yet Henry's youth was not defined by this single bond. The royal court, a dazzling stage of intrigue and seduction, offered a tapestry of potential lovers and fleeting romances. Whispers spoke of Mary Boleyn, sister to Anne, whose charm and vivacity caught Henry's wandering eye. Their liaison was one of secret glances and stolen moments, a dance of temptation behind the heavy velvet curtains of palace chambers. Mary's youth and beauty provided a playful reprieve from the rigid constraints of royal duty, a brief interlude in the king's quest for both pleasure and power. But it was Anne Boleyn who would forever change the course of Henry's life. Unlike her sister, Anne was no mere object of desire but a force of nature, a woman whose sharp mind and fierce independence challenged the king in ways few had dared. Their courtship was a perilous game of wit and will, a battle for hearts and crowns that pushed Henry to defy the very church itself. The story of their affair is one painted with vibrant strokes of passion and peril, the secret letters folded with care, the whispered promises beneath moonlit arches, the thrill of danger that hung in the air like the scent of blooming jasmine. Henry's infatuation with Anne was a fire that consumed him, driving him to break with Rome and reshape the religious landscape of England forever. Yet amid these grand dramas were the smaller, quieter affairs, lovers who flickered briefly in the king's life like shooting stars. These relationships, sometimes tender, sometimes scandalous, were threads woven into the complex fabric of Henry's youth and reign. They revealed a man as deeply human as he was king, a man driven by desire, ambition, and the endless search for connection in a world defined by crowns and courts. In the vivid tapestry of Henry's youth, woven with threads of passion, ambition, and relentless energy, the royal court itself was a living, breathing stage where desires and destinies collided beneath tapestries heavy with heraldry and candlelight that flickered like distant stars. As a young prince, Henry was more than a mere heir to the throne. He was a tempest, his spirit blazing with the boundless vigor of youth and the intoxicating promise of power yet to be claimed. The corridors of palaces echoed with the sounds of his footsteps, confident, bold, sometimes reckless, as he strode between lessons in Latin and jousts that sent splinters of wood flying like shooting stars. His laughter was a clarion call that rallied friends and intimidated rivals, a sound that carried through the vaulted halls and into the gardens where the scent of blooming roses mingled with the crisp English air. Among the many faces that flickered through his youthful years, none captured his heart quite like Catherine of Aragon. Their marriage, forged in the fires of political alliance, blossomed initially with genuine affection. Catherine's calm and dignified presence was a harbour in the storm of court life, a steady anchor for Henry's restless heart. Yet beneath the surface, the pressures of producing a male heir and the shifting tides of favour and fortune began to weigh heavily. Henry's gaze, once solely fixed on Catherine, started to wander, drawn to the allure of new and forbidden passions. It was in this swirling maelstrom of court intrigue that Mary Boleyn emerged, a young woman whose charm and vivacity sparked a different kind of flame in the young king's life. Their affair was whispered about in hushed tones, tales of stolen meetings behind thick tapestries and clandestine rendezvous beneath the moon's watchful gaze. Mary was a bright and playful star in Henry's constellation of loves, her laughter a light contrast to the sombre expectations that clung to palace walls. Yet it was Anne Boleyn who would seize Henry's heart and forever alter the course of England's destiny. Anne was a tempest incarnate, her sharp intellect and fierce independence a challenge that both thrilled and unsettled the king. Their relationship unfolded like a high-stakes dance, each step measured but charged with electricity. Anne's refusal to be a mere pawn in royal games set her apart. She was a woman who demanded to be seen and heard, whose very presence ignited the court with a mixture of admiration and fear. Henry's pursuit of Anne was relentless, a desperate and fiery quest that led him to shatter centuries of religious tradition and political order. Their love affair was marked by secret meetings in moonlit gardens where the scent of jasmine and night-blooming roses wrapped around them like a velvet cloak. Letters slipped through hidden hands, filled with declarations as bold as swords and as tender as whispered prayers. This dangerous liaison became the catalyst for monumental change: the king's break from the Catholic Church, the birth of the Church of England, and a kingdom forever divided by faith and politics. Yet, amid the grandeur and upheaval, Henry's youth was also punctuated by quieter moments of desire and vulnerability. Other lovers, some known and others lost to history's shadows, danced briefly in his life, women whose names appear only in the faintest of court records or the softest of rumors. These fleeting relationships, some scandalous, others tender, revealed the man behind the crown, a soul yearning for connection, for understanding, for the warmth of human affection amid the cold grandeur of monarchy. As Henry's youth gave way to the tumult of kingship, these early loves and affairs shaped not only his heart but the very fabric of a nation in flux, an England caught between medieval tradition and the dawn of a new age, with a king whose passions would ignite both his own fate and that of his kingdom in a blaze of desire, betrayal, and unyielding ambition. In the swirling mists of Henry's early courtly life, the line between duty and desire often blurred like watercolor strokes bleeding into one another, creating scenes as vivid as any painted by the masters. The palace was a stage where every glance, every smile, every whispered word could tip the balance between favor and ruin, and young Henry, brimming with vitality, was both actor and audience in this grand drama. His heart was a tempestuous sea, rising and falling with the tides of youthful passion and the winds of ambition that carried him toward the throne. Amid the glittering assemblies and sumptuous feasts, he sought not only alliances and crowns but also the intoxicating promise of love, a force as compelling as the swords that clashed in the jousting tournaments and as unpredictable as the flames that danced in the hearths. His early romances were a cascade of stolen moments and secret rendezvous, where the air was thick with the scent of lavender and rosewater, and the thrill of forbidden affection made even the coldest marble corridors seem alive with warmth. Mary Boleyn, with her playful charm and radiant smile, was one such enchantress, a bright spark who captured the king's fleeting attentions in a world where loyalty and discretion were prized above all. Their affair, whispered about in the shadows of the court, was marked by moments of laughter and light-hearted mischief, a brief respite from the heavy mantle of kingship that awaited Henry. But it was Anne Boleyn who cast the longest and most complicated shadow over Henry's heart, and was no mere courtly beauty. She was a whirlwind of intellect, ambition, and fiery spirit, a woman whose very presence challenged the rigid hierarchies of the time. Their relationship was a tapestry woven with threads of danger and desire, a delicate balance of power that shifted with every meeting and every whispered conversation behind the silken curtains of the royal chambers. Henry's pursuit of Anne was both a personal passion and a political gamble, a daring wager that would cost him dearly yet redefine the very soul of England. The king's relentless devotion to and forced a schism with the Catholic Church, leading to the birth of the Church of England, a move that reshaped the religious and political landscape of Europe. This bold defiance was fueled not only by love but also by an unyielding desire to secure a male heir, to cement his legacy and the future of the Tudor dynasty. Yet amid these grand upheavals, Henry's youthful passions were also colored by a cast of other lovers, some fleeting, some significant, and all contributing to the complex portrait of a king driven as much by human desire as by royal duty. These women, ladies-in-waiting, noblewomen, and perhaps even commoners whose names have been lost to time, wove through his life like brief, bright flashes, moments of tenderness or scandal that punctuated the relentless march of history. Their stories, often whispered behind closed doors or penned in secret letters, reveal the deeply human side of a man who could command armies and kingdoms yet still be undone by the simplest longing for connection and affection. In these early years, Henry was not merely a monarch in the making, but a young man discovering the intoxicating power of love and lust, whose choices would ripple across generations and whose heartbeats would echo in the grand halls of English history forever. As the seasons turned and Henry stepped fully into the role of king, the vibrant fire of his youth began to smolder with a complexity born of responsibility, desire, and the heavy shadow of legacy. The royal court, a swirling maelstrom of ambition and intrigue, became both his playground and his prison, a place where love could blossom in secret alcoves and be strangled by suspicion before dawn. Among the many faces that flickered through these years, Anne Boleyn stood brightest, a flame that drew Henry irresistibly yet threatened to consume him whole. Their relationship, forged in the secret whispers of moonlit gardens and the stolen brush of fingertips beneath embroidered sleeves, was a daring challenge to the old order, and was unlike any queen before her, fiery, intelligent, and fiercely independent, captivating Henry not just with her beauty but with a mind sharp enough to match his own. Their courtship was a perilous dance of wills, where every word carried weight, every glance a negotiation. It was this dangerous passion that led Henry to shatter the centuries-old ties with the Catholic Church, initiating a religious revolution that would forever alter England's soul. Yet even as their love burned bright, it was shadowed by the relentless pressure to produce a male heir, a demand that would prove both the couple's undoing and the catalyst for one of history's most infamous tragedies. Anne's failure to bear a surviving son, coupled with the venomous machinations of court rivals, culminated in accusations that would end her reign and her life. The charges, adultery, incest, and treason, were as politically motivated as they were personal, a grim testament to the deadly stakes of Tudor courtship. Anne's final moments, marked by courage and dignity, echoed through the ages as a poignant reminder of the perilous intersection of love and power. But Henry's story did not end with Anne. In the wake of such loss, the king's heart and court turned again, seeking new alliances and new loves to steady a kingdom still trembling from upheaval. Jane Seymour entered his life like a gentle dawn, her quiet strength and kindness offering a balm to wounds both visible and hidden. Their marriage, less tempestuous but deeply sincere, brought the long-awaited male heir, Edward, whose birth kindled hope amid the shadows. Yet the fragile joy was soon tempered by tragedy, as Jane's death in childbirth cast a pall over the court and deepened the king's solitude. Still, the relentless tide of politics and passion surged forward, carrying Henry through further marriages and affairs. Each relationship a thread in the complex fabric of his reign, revealing a man as fallible as he was formidable. The youthful energy of Catherine Howard, the pragmatic alliance with Anne of Cleves, and the enduring companionship of Catherine Parr each played their part in the unfolding drama, shaping not only Henry's life but the destiny of a nation poised on the edge of modernity. Through it all, Henry remained a figure of contradictions, a lover and a ruler, a man capable of deep tenderness and ruthless cruelty, whose passions ignited the fires of change and whose legacy would be written in both love and blood. In the grand tapestry of Henry's life, the threads of youthful vigor and seasoned kingly authority wove together in patterns as intricate as the embroidered silks that adorned the royal court. As he moved from the impulsive passions of his early years into the complex responsibilities of sovereign power, the man beneath the crown grew ever more layered, sometimes tender, sometimes merciless, always commanding. The echoes of his early loves lingered in the chambers of his mind, their voices like ghostly melodies weaving through the fabric of his days. Catherine of Aragon's steadfast devotion had been the foundation upon which much of his early reign was built, her dignified presence a steadying force amid the swirling tempests of politics and personal desire. Yet, as his affections shifted and the kingdom's demands pressed harder, Henry's heart and court became a kaleidoscope of new faces and shifting alliances. Anne Boleyn's fiery spirit and sharp intellect had set ablaze the very institutions of England, forcing the king to choose between old faith and new power. Their tempestuous relationship was a crucible that forged a new religious order but also left scars that would never fully heal. Jane Seymour's gentle strength had brought a brief, shining light of hope with the birth of Edward, a son whose tiny fingers seemed to clutch the future itself. Her death left a hollow ache that resonated through the halls like a mournful song, a reminder of the fragility that lay beneath even the grandest thrones. Anne of Cleves, the foreign princess whose portrait had promised alliance but whose presence fell short of the king's expectations, was swiftly cast aside. A political pawn spared the fates of others but nonetheless a casualty of royal dissatisfaction. Catherine Howard, with her youthful exuberance and tragic downfall, was a stark lesson in the dangers of youthful indiscretion and the unforgiving gaze of the Tudor court. And then there was Catherine Parr, whose wisdom and compassion became a balm to Henry's aging soul, a companion who navigated the treacherous waters of his later years with both grace and courage. Within the palace walls, the intrigues and whispered secrets never ceased. The court was a living organism, pulsing with ambition, jealousy, and fleeting alliances. Noblewomen vied for favor, courtiers schemed for advancement, and the king's desires and fears shaped the delicate dance of power and affection. Henry himself was both puppet and puppeteer in this grand theatre, wielding his charm and temper with equal force, his moods shifting like the unpredictable English weather, from thunderous fury to warm generosity in the space of a heartbeat. Yet beneath the spectacle and the weight of crown and kingdom, Henry remained a man haunted by the ghosts of lost loves and the relentless passage of time. His story was not merely one of political conquest or dynastic ambition, but of human longing and vulnerability, of a heart that sought connection even as it wielded power. As the years unfurled like the rich tapestries hung in the great halls, Henry's life stood as a testament to the profound complexities of love and leadership, a vivid tale woven with passion, pain, and the unyielding pursuit of legacy. In those days before the full blaze of Henry's reign, the palace gardens and stone halls were alive with the restless energy of youth, where the scent of blooming roses mingled with whispered promises and the faint clatter of armored knights training beneath the early morning sun. Henry, still a prince with a wild spark in his eyes, moved through this world like a comet blazing across a midnight sky, unpredictable, brilliant, and impossible to ignore. His early years were a whirlwind of lessons and leisure, of tournaments where the clash of steel rang like thunder and dances where the flicker of candlelight caught the shimmer of silks and jewels. It was a time when the future king tasted the heady thrill of forbidden romance and felt the tug of destiny pulling him inexorably toward the throne. Among the many faces that stirred his youthful heart, Mary Boleyn stood out, her laughter bright and carefree, her beauty a fresh bloom in the garden of courtly love. Their affair was like a stolen melody, brief yet unforgettable, set against the backdrop of political intrigue and dynastic ambition. But the winds of fate would soon shift, carrying Anne Boleyn into Henry's orbit like a fierce and captivating storm. Anne's sharp wit and fiery spirit were as irresistible as they were dangerous, challenging the king in ways that would ignite a revolution within his very soul. Their courtship was marked by secrecy and tension, a game of risk and desire played beneath the watchful eyes of courtiers and the rigid gaze of the church. Henry's passion for Anne was a flame that burned so bright it scorched the very foundations of England's religious order, leading to a break with Rome that shook the continent and reshaped the course of history. Yet amid this upheaval, Henry's youthful escapades continued to weave through the fabric of his life, other lovers and fleeting affairs that added color and complexity to the portrait of a king as human as he was mighty. Some were whispered in secret, others paraded boldly before the court, each encounter revealing different facets of a man searching for connection in a world where love was often entwined with power and peril. These early chapters of Henry's life were not just the prelude to a legendary reign but a vivid saga of passion and politics, where the line between desire and duty blurred, and where the heartbeats of a young prince echoed through the corridors of history, forever shaping the destiny of a nation poised on the brink of transformation. As the years wove themselves into the rich fabric of Henry's life, the fiery passions of his youth began to mellow into something more complex, a bittersweet blend of longing, regret, and the weighty wisdom born of experience. The king who once charged boldly into battles of love and politics now found himself navigating the quieter, more shadowed corridors of memory, where laughter mingled with loss and triumph was tinged with sorrow. The echoes of his loves, Catherine's steadfast grace, Anne's fierce fire, Jane's gentle light, the fleeting brightness of Anne of Cleves and Catherine Howard, and the steady strength of Catherine Parr, resonated like distant melodies, haunting yet beautiful. These women had shaped not only the man but the very course of England, their stories intertwined with his in a tapestry rich with passion and power. As Henry's reign drew to a close, the kingdom stood on the cusp of a new era, one forged in the crucible of his desires and decisions. His children, Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, carried forward the legacy of a father whose heart had been both a battlefield and a sanctuary. The world he left behind was one transformed, its foundations shaken and reshaped by the tempest of his reign. And though his story neared its twilight, the flames he ignited continued to burn bright, casting light and shadow on the generations to come. The tale of Henry, king, lover, and man, remains a timeless saga, whispered through the corridors of history like a bedtime story told beneath a star-studded sky, forever captivating those who dare to listen. Even as Henry's health waned and the twilight of his reign drew near, The echoes of his earlier passions continued to ripple through the palace halls like the soft murmur of a fading song. The vivid memories of youthful order, the stolen glances exchanged beneath vaulted ceilings, the scent of jasmine mingling with candle wax, the secret laughter that once filled the corridors, lingered like ghosts, refusing to be silenced by time or circumstance. Each of Henry's great loves had left an indelible mark not only on his heart but on the very soul of England. Catherine of Aragon, with her unwavering dignity and fierce loyalty, had anchored the young king's early years, her grace a steadfast beacon amid political storms. And Boleyn, fiery and unyielding, had challenged him to defy the ancient powers of church and state. Her sharp intellect and fierce were forever altering the religious landscape. Jane Seymour, gentle and pure, had offered a fragile hope through the birth of Edward, her quiet strength a momentary reprieve from the turmoil. And of Cleves, though a brief and politically motivated union, underscored the king's vulnerability to the tides of diplomacy and personal preference. Catherine Howard's youthful exuberance and tragic fall illustrated the perilous intersection of love and ambition, while Catherine Parr's wisdom and compassion provided comfort and stability in Henry's final years. As the kingdom prepared to bid farewell to a monarch whose life had been a tempest of desire, devotion, and destruction, the future lay uncertain but filled with promise. Edward, young and earnest, would soon ascend the throne, carrying the hopes of Protestant reform and a kingdom eager for renewal. Mary's fierce determination to restore Catholicism would ignite fierce conflict, while Elizabeth's sharp mind and indomitable spirit promised an era of flourishing arts and exploration. Henry's story, rich with passion, power, and poignant humanity, had shaped a nation on the brink of transformation. His legacy was not merely the sum of his marriages or political upheavals, but the complex, vivid portrait of a man who loved fiercely, ruled decisively, and lived fully, leaving behind a saga that would be told and retold through the ages, a timeless bedtime tale echoing beneath the stars. As the heavy velvet curtains of Henry's chamber swayed gently in the cool evening breeze, the once fierce king lay quiet, his breath shallow, a faint flicker of the passionate fire that had long driven him now reduced to a soft ember. Around him, the palace hummed with anticipation and quiet grief, courtiers and attendants moving like shadows, careful not to disturb the fragile balance between life and death. His thoughts drifted back to a time when the world was younger, when he was a prince with a heart as untamed as the wild horses he raced across the fields of Greenwich. Those early days had been filled with the thrill of discovery, learning the arts of war and statecraft, the intoxicating allure of courtly love, and the heady scent of jasmine and rose that clung to secret trysts in the palace gardens. The memories of Catherine of Aragon's steadfast gaze and gentle hands surfaced, reminding him of the steadfast foundation upon which much of his early life rested. Then came the spark that was Anne Boleyn, a tempestuous force who ignited his soul and changed the course of a nation. Their forbidden love was a tempest that shattered old allegiances and carved a new path for England, filled with danger and desire. Anne's sharp tongue and fierce will challenged him as no other had, and their union, though brief, left a legacy of religious revolution and political upheaval that would echo for centuries. Jane Seymour's tender smile and quiet strength offered a balm for his restless heart, and the birth of Edward brought a fleeting joy that was as fragile as morning dew. Yet even as he sought solace in love, the shadows of court intrigue and betrayal loomed ever near. The youthful laughter of Catherine Howard, so full of promise, was silenced too soon by the cruel hand of suspicion and scandal, a reminder that even the brightest flames can be snuffed out in an instant. Catherine Parr, the wise and compassionate, stood by Henry in his final days, her presence a soothing balm amid the storm. As Henry's eyelids fluttered closed for the last time, the tapestry of his life, woven with threads of love, power, ambition, and loss, was complete. His story, filled with passion and poignancy, would live on in the hearts and histories of those who came after, a timeless saga whispered beneath the stars, forever part of England's enduring legend. The grand halls of the palace, now steeped in solemn silence, bore witness to the passing of an era, a king whose life had been as tumultuous and passionate as the storms that battered England's shores. Henry's death marked the end of a reign defined by relentless ambition and fierce love, a reign that had reshaped the very soul of a nation. Yet even as the crown passed to his young son, the shadows of Henry's desires and decisions lingered, weaving their way into the fate of England's future. In the quiet aftermath, the courtiers whispered tales of the man behind the legend, the youthful prince who had once ridden wild across sun-dappled fields, whose laughter had filled the palace gardens, whose heart had been both a battlefield and a sanctuary. Stories spread of his fiery temper, his boundless charisma, and the tempest of love affairs that had both elevated and undone him. They spoke of Catherine of Aragon's unwavering devotion, a queen whose dignity and faith had inspired loyalty and heartbreak alike. Anne Boleyn's tragic fate was recounted with a mixture of sorrow and awe, her fierce spirit a symbol of defiance and change. Jane Seymour's gentle touch and the brief happiness she brought were remembered as a delicate bloom in a thorny crown. The colourful chapters of Anne of Cleves and Catherine Howard added layers of intrigue and cautionary tales, while Catherine Parr's wisdom and kindness offered a final note of grace. As England stood on the brink of transformation, Henry's legacy loomed large, a complex mosaic of love, betrayal, faith, and power. His children, each bearing the marks of his tumultuous reign, prepared to navigate a kingdom fraught with religious upheaval and political strife. Edward's Protestant zeal, Mary's Catholic fervour, and Elizabeth's cunning resilience promised a future shaped by the echoes of their father's passions. Amid the flickering candlelight and the hushed prayers, the story of Henry, the king, the lover, the man, endured. It became a tale told in whispered legends and grand histories, a bedtime story for a nation forever changed. The vivid tapestry of his life, rich with colour and shadow, continued to unfold in the hearts of those who remembered, a timeless saga woven into the very fabric of England's identity. In the years that followed Henry's passing, the echoes of his tumultuous reign reverberated through the corridors of power and the hearts of the people. His life, a sprawling saga of love, betrayal, and unyielding ambition, became legend, told in hushed tones by candlelight, painted in vivid strokes by chroniclers, and immortalized in the very stones of the castles and cathedrals that bore witness to his triumphs and tragedies. Edward, crowned as a boy, stepped into a world shaped irrevocably by his father's decisions. The young king, cloaked in the weight of expectation, sought to steer England toward a future defined by Protestant reform, carrying the torch ignited by Henry's defiance of Rome. Meanwhile, Mary's fierce devotion to the old faith kindled a fierce counterpoint, a struggle that would set the stage for a kingdom divided, torn between tradition and transformation. Elizabeth, ever the enigmatic phoenix, watched and waited, her sharp mind absorbing the lessons carved from the turbulent lives of her parents. The legacy of Henry's 6 marriages, the alliances forged, the hearts broken, the blood spilled, was a tapestry of human drama that continued to shape the destiny of the realm. Each queen's story was a thread woven into the fabric of history, their lives intertwined with politics, passion, and the relentless pursuit of power. The court remained a place of intrigue and ambition, where whispers could topple kings and love could become a weapon sharper than any sword. Yet beyond the halls of power, the people of England lived with the ripples of Henry's reign, in their faith, their laws, and their very identities. The break from Rome had unleashed waves of change that touched every corner of the kingdom, challenging centuries-old beliefs and igniting fierce debates in village squares and grand cathedrals alike. Henry's story, rich with vivid characters and unforgettable moments, became a timeless narrative, a bedtime tale whispered to generations, filled with the light of passion and the shadows of betrayal. It was a story of a man who dared to rewrite the rules of love and power, whose heartbeats echoed through history like the tolling of cathedral bells, forever marking the dawn of a new England. Long after Henry's footsteps faded from the palace floors and his voice ceased to command the grand halls, the ripples of his life continued to shape the very essence of England's identity. The world he left behind was a kingdom caught between the old and the new, a place where faith and power wrestled in a dance as intricate and perilous as any courtship. Edward, crowned in the shadow of his father's towering legacy, sought to steer England with the fervour of youth, his heart burning with the hope of a reformed church and a modern realm. Mary, fierce and unyielding, rose like a storm, her devotion to the ancient faith a thunderclap that shook the fragile peace. Elizabeth, with eyes sharp as a hawk and a mind honed by the turbulent lessons of her family's past, would emerge as a beacon of stability and brilliance, guiding England through storms of her own. Yet beneath these great historical figures, the stories of the women who had loved and been loved by Henry whispered through the ages, their voices woven into the fabric of legend. Catherine of Aragon's dignified sorrow, Anne Boleyn's fiery spirit and tragic fall, Jane Seymour's fleeting light, and of Cleves' quiet resilience, Catherine Howard's youthful folly, and Catherine Parr's wisdom. All these threads combined to create a tapestry rich with passion, pain, and the indomitable strength of women who shaped history in their own right. The grand saga of Henry's life, told in the flickering glow of hearth fires and the hallowed halls of learning, became a bedtime story for a nation, a tale of love's triumph and tragedy, of power's seductive allure and peril, of a man whose desires ignited a revolution and whose legacy would echo through centuries. As the stars will overhead and the night wraps the world in its velvet cloak, the story of Henry remains alive, a vivid, untamed flame flickering in the heart of England, forever inviting those who listen to step into the rich, complex dance of history and humanity. In the quiet after the storm, as candles guttered low and the echoes of a king's footsteps faded into the corridors of time, the tale of Henry, lover, ruler, and man, settled into the fabric of history like a whispered legend. His life was a tapestry of fierce passions and delicate sorrows, of towering ambition and tender vulnerability, a story carved into the very bones of England. The women who loved him, the children who carried his blood, and the kingdom forever changed by his desires and decisions stand as living echoes of a reign both magnificent and tragic. Henry's saga invites us to peer beyond the gilded crown and the imposing throne, to see a man whose heart beat with the same hopes, fears, and dreams that shape us all. And as the night deepens and the stars will slowly overhead, that story, rich, complex, and endlessly human, lives on, a timeless bedtime tale whispered beneath the vast English sky. Welcome to the Sleepy Scribe. Your endless internet wandering has brought you here, and hopefully you can finally sleep to today's topic. Now, before we begin, comment where you are listening from, and how late it is where you are. It is so very interesting to see how far and wide people come to listen. Lastly, if you enjoy these videos, please subscribe, it would be very appreciated. Now, let us begin. The air above the highest peaks of Olympus shimmered that evening, as if the mountain itself were holding its breath. Clouds gathered in strange, rolling shapes, folding and curling like the silken robes of 1,000 dancers, their edges stained gold by the dying sun. From far below, shepherds glanced upward and whispered that the gods were restless, though none dared speak too loudly for fear their words might be carried to ears that did not forgive. In the great hall of Zeus, the marble columns glowed with the warmth of the setting light, each one taller than the masts of mortal ships, carved with the deeds of gods who strode through chaos long before the first man ever lifted his eyes to the sky. The king of the gods sat upon his throne of storm cloud and polished gold, fingers drumming against the armrest with the faint crackle of distant lightning. His eyes, the color of a brewing tempest, were fixed on the horizon, but his thoughts wandered far beyond it. Hera sat beside him, her beauty sharp as the edge of a spear, her crown catching the last rays of daylight like a circlet of captured fire. She smiled, but it was a smile without warmth, for the whispers of the fates had reached her not in words, but in the twitch of the threads they wove. A child was coming, one unlike any before. That child would be the son of Zeus, but not of her, and the insult burned like a coal hidden beneath her tongue. Below Olympus, in a palace where mortal walls shook when the wind rose too high, a queen lay restless in her chamber. Alcmene, daughter of Electrion, had the grace of a river at dawn and the quiet strength of a stone weathering centuries of rain. She did not yet know that tonight her life would be stolen into a story the bards would sing for all the ages. Zeus, wrapped in shadow, descended from Olympus as a falcon might drop from the clouds, the air bending around him in deference to the power he carried. He came not in his own form, but cloaked in the likeness of Alcmene's husband, Amphitryon, who even now rode far away at war. The gods rarely considered mortal hearts in their games, and Zeus was no different. His mind burned only with desire and the thrill of shaping a destiny. In her chamber, Alcmene looked up, startled, and saw her husband returned early, his voice as she knew it, his face lit with the smile she had missed in long nights of loneliness. She welcomed him, and the torches guttered as if bowing to the moment, the air heavy with the strange sweetness of divinity mingling with mortal breath. Above them, Hera's eyes narrowed until they were slits of molten gold. She had seen this before. She knew how the seed of Zeus, once planted, grew into a thorn in her heart. Each child of his another reminder that even the Queen of the Heavens could not chain the lightning's will. She would not strike tonight. No, vengeance was a dish she preferred served with time enough for the victim to believe themselves safe. The night stretched long and strange, and in the morning the sun seemed to rise slower than usual, as though it, too, wished to watch the threads of fate tighten around the mortal queen. 9 months passed with the quiet inevitability of the turning seasons, and the child was born under a sky heavy with omens. The midwives whispered of the boy's size, his grasp like iron even as he first touched the world, his cry loud enough to make the rafters shiver. He was named Hercules, glory of Hera, though the name would taste bitter in the goddess's mouth. Hera herself, feigning benevolence, sent down 2 great serpents into the cradle, their scales glistening like polished emerald under the torchlight, tongues flicking to taste the air heavy with new life. But the infant only laughed, clutching each serpent in his tiny fists, squeezing until their bodies fell limp, their coils unraveling like discarded ropes. The servants crossed themselves, the midwives fled, and Alcmene held her child close, her heart a storm of pride and dread. Hera, watching from above, did not rage, not yet. She only smiled that same cold, perfect smile, for she knew the road ahead would be long, and pain could be woven into every step of it. The first years of Hercules' life were a curious blend of peace and the faint, ever-present hum of something greater moving just beyond the edge of sight. Alcmene raised him as best she could, with the patience of one who knew her child would never truly belong to her alone. He was strong before most boys could even walk. Once, when barely 2 years old, he lifted a heavy bronze pot from the hearth and toddled across the room as if it were a basket of figs, leaving the servants to stare with open mouths. The villagers began to murmur about him in the marketplace. Some called him blessed, others whispered the more dangerous word, cursed. For every act of wonder, there seemed a shadow cast. A neighbor's prized bull broke its tether one day, rampaging toward the olive groves, only to be caught by the tiny hands of Hercules, who held its horns until the beast snorted in bewilderment and calmed. Yet later that same week, a child tripped while playing near him and broke an arm. Though Hercules had meant no harm, the mother looked at him as though she had seen a wolf among lambs. It was Hera's unseen hand that kept these small storms swirling around him, little reminders that his life would never pass as that of a normal child. She could not undo his birth, but she could ensure he never knew the ease of forgetting what he was. Amphitryon returned from war to find a son who seemed more like a young ox in strength than a boy. The man, proud but cautious, decided that such raw force must be tempered, for an untrained blade cuts friend as often as foe. He called on the finest tutors and warriors to shape the child's body and mind. Eurytus, famed archer and king, came to teach him the bow, his hands guiding Hercules' much smaller ones until the boy's fingers remembered the tension and release. From Linus, a master of the lyre, he learned music, though Hercules' patience for delicate strings was not as strong as his grip. More than once he snapped them in frustration, sending the poor instrument groaning in protest. Wrestling came naturally, and Chiron the wise centaur instructed him in the art of reading the stars, knowing the paths of beasts, and tempering power with thought. But Hera's jealousy does not sleep, and one day, during a lesson with Linus, a sudden spark of anger seized Hercules. Linus had chided him for playing poorly, perhaps with more sharpness than kindness, and in a heartbeat Hercules struck without realizing the force he wielded. Linus fell and did not rise again, and though the boy's eyes filled with horror at what he had done, the damage was carved into the tale of his life. Amphitryon, fearing the growing storm inside his son, sent him away from the city to the countryside, where endless hills and fields could drink up his strength. There he worked the land, wrestled with lions that prowled too close to the flocks, and ran barefoot over sharp stones without flinching. In these years he learned not only to fight, but to endure, how to carry a yoke across miles, how to stand unyielding in the rain until the storm passed. Still, there was a restlessness in him, a longing like the pull of the tide for the shore. He could not name it, but it was the whisper of fate in his blood, telling him that his hands were not meant only for ploughing or guarding sheep. It was during these years that he met Iphicles, his twin in the eyes of the world but not in truth, for Iphicles was mortal, the son of Amphitryon alone. They wrestled in the dirt, raced through groves, and hunted together. Yet even Iphicles felt the difference between them as one feels the heat of the sun compared to the warmth of a hearth. Once, during a hunt, they cornered a wild boar, tusks gleaming with spittle, eyes red with fury. Iphicles hesitated, but Hercules stepped forward, barehanded, and caught the beast by its tusks, forcing it to the ground until it lay panting in surrender. He laughed then, a sound half joy, half defiance, and the forest seemed to listen. Somewhere far above, Hera listened too, her fingers tightening on the armrest of her throne. She would let him grow, let his pride root deep in the soil of his youth, so that when the time came to tear him down, the fall would be all the more satisfying. The seasons turned, and with them Hercules' body grew into something that made even seasoned warriors glance twice when he passed. By the time he was in his late teens, his shoulders seemed carved from the same marble that lined temple walls, his hands rough and scarred like those of a veteran soldier, yet his eyes still held the restless glint of a youth not entirely sure where to place all the storms inside him. He could swing an axe through the trunk of an olive tree with a single strike, lift a cart from the mud while its owner stared, speechless, and throw a javelin so far it seemed to vanish into the blue haze where the earth met the sky. But for all this strength, There was a certain clumsiness to him in everyday life, the way a man with enormous feet might forget to step lightly indoors. Once, while visiting the home of a kindly old shepherd, Hercules reached to pat the man's back in greeting and instead sent him stumbling forward into a barrel of wine, nearly drowning him in his own winter stores. The shepherd forgave him, laughing through coughs, but stories like this began to follow the young man from village to village. It was around this time that Amphitryon decided the boy's strength needed sharper purpose, and so he sent him to train with the army of Thebes. There Hercules learned the discipline of ranks, the thud of 100 shields moving as one, the weight of bronze armor pressing against his shoulders under the sun. He proved himself quickly, perhaps too quickly, for in their first mock battle he accidentally snapped the shaft of a captain's spear with a careless parry, earning a mixture of awe and irritation from the veterans. Still, the men warmed to him, for he could drink them under the table and still carry half of them home without complaint, whistling as if burden meant nothing to him. Yet Herod's shadow lengthened with his reputation. One summer, when the hills were dry and the air heavy with the scent of dust, word reached Thebes of a lion prowling near Mount Cithaeron, a beast so large its roar was said to echo off 3 valleys at once. Cattle were vanishing, shepherds were afraid to leave their huts, and the king offered rich rewards to any who could slay it. Hercules, not yet the hero sung in every tavern, saw in this a chance to prove his worth beyond campfire stories. He set out with nothing but his bow, a quiver of arrows, and a stout club he had carved himself from the trunk of an ash tree. The journey up the mountain was steep, the rocks loose underfoot, the air filled with the buzzing of unseen insects. By nightfall he found signs of the lion, enormous paw prints pressed deep into the earth, tufts of tawny fur caught on low branches, and the sharp, coppery scent of blood lingering in the air. He followed until the moon was high, its pale light making the world strange and silver. Then he heard it, the low, rolling growl that made the hairs on his arms rise. The lion emerged from the darkness as if the shadows themselves had given it form, its eyes 2 burning coals, its manner a halo of wild, tangled gold. Hercules loosed an arrow. It struck, but the shaft splintered against the beast's hide as though it were stone. The lion roared, a sound that shook the marrow of his bones, and charged. Hercules did not flee. He dropped the bow, raised his club, and met the beast head-on. The impact rattled the night, man and lion tumbling together in a blur of claws and muscle. For a heartbeat, Hercules thought the weight of it might crush him, but then the tide turned. With a grip like iron, he seized the lion's throat, twisting until its roars became a rattling gasp and its body grew still. He rose, chest heaving, staring down at the great shape sprawled before him. In that moment, he felt something stirred deep in his blood, a certainty, fierce and unshakable, that his life would not be one of quiet fields or modest victories. He skinned the lion with the point of his own arrows, the hide thick and stubborn, and draped it across his shoulders, the head serving as a hood that framed his face in a crown of fangs. When he returned to Thebes, the city buzzed with talk of the young warrior in the lion's cloak. Amphitryon embraced him with pride, but in the shadow of Olympus, Hera sat unmoving, her gaze fixed on the flickering threads of his fate. Let him grow strong, she thought, for even the mightiest oak can be felled if you rot it from the roots. Hercules' fame after the Cithaeron lion spread faster than the autumn winds that stripped leaves from the trees, and with fame came the curiosity of those who saw in him not just a warrior, but a figure who might shape the destiny of kingdoms. Amphitryon, proud but cautious, decided his son's gifts must be sharpened in every way, not merely in strength. To this end, he summoned the finest teachers from across the lands, men whose names were spoken with respect in both palaces and taverns, each tasked with teaching the young demigod a skill that might temper his raw power. Eurytus, master of the bow, came first, his lean frame and keen eyes making him seem more hawk than man. In the practice yard, under a sun that turned the dust golden, he taught Hercules the art of drawing a bowstring smoothly, the patience to breathe before release, and the humility to know that not every target falls at the first attempt. But patience was a stubborn weed in Hercules' soul. Once, after loosing an arrow and missing the mark entirely, he muttered that the wind had been against him, prompting Eurytus to chuckle and say, "The wind is against all men, boy, it is your aim that must learn to fight it." Hercules scowled, but the words stayed with him longer than he cared to admit. Linus, the gentle yet sharp-tongued master of the lyre, followed. The music room smelled faintly of cedar and beeswax, the strings of the instruments catching the light like spider silk. Linus hoped that music might smooth the rough edges of a spirit forged in fire. For a time, it worked. Hercules's thick fingers found their way to gentle melodies, his deep voice humming in tune. But one afternoon, after a particularly clumsy pluck that snapped a string, Linus scolded him with more bite than grace, and something old and dangerous stirred in Hercules's chest. The outburst was over in a flash. A shove, a cry. The master sprawled on the ground, unmoving, and the young man's face drained of all color as he realized what he had done. The city judged it an accident, but the whispers began to cling to him like burrs. Amphitryon, fearing the city walls were closing in on his son, sent him to the countryside once more, not as punishment but as refuge. There, Hercules found a new teacher in Chiron, the wise centaur whose knowledge was as deep as the rivers that ran through the land. Chiron taught him to read the constellations and to hear in the wind the stories it carried from far-off places. Under Chiron's patient gaze, Hercules learned to track beasts without disturbing the forest, to find water by the taste of the soil, to read the shifting moods of the sky. Yet even in these moments of peace, his strength had a way of announcing itself. Once, when they came upon a boulder blocking a narrow pass, Chiron suggested they go around. Hercules, grinning, set down his pack, braced himself, and rolled the boulder aside as if it were a stubborn sheep refusing to leave its pen. Chiron shook his head but said nothing, for he knew the boy's power was as much a part of him as his beating heart. There was also Castor and Pollux, twin brothers who took it upon themselves to teach Hercules the intricacies of combat. From Castor he learned horsemanship, mastering the subtle cues of the reins until horse and rider moved as one. From Pollux he learned boxing, though more than once Hercules' enthusiasm sent his sparring partner flying into the dust. Pollux would groan and rise again, muttering that training with Hercules was like trying to wrestle a temple pillar. But perhaps the most unexpected lesson came from Autolycus, a thief so skilled he could steal the sandals from your feet while you were still wearing them. Amphitryon thought a little cunning might balance his son's straightforward strength. Hercules learned to move silently, to notice the smallest shift in a man's expression, to value information as much as weapons. Of course, when Hercules tried to sneak up on Chiron as practice, the centaur simply said without looking up, "You walk like thunder, even the stones hear you coming." Hercules laughed then, a rare, easy laugh, and for a while it seemed the storm in his nature might be tamed by such moments. But far above, Hera still watched. Every skill he learned, every friend he made, every small victory he tasted, these were knots she would one day cut, one by one, until the tapestry of his life unraveled beneath him. Hera's wrath, long simmering beneath a mask of calm, finally broke with the subtle cruelty of a winter frost creeping through the roots of a proud tree. Hercules, for all his growing strength and wisdom, was not prepared for the darkness that would soon twist his fate. One afternoon, in a quiet village where the olive branches swayed lazily in the warm breeze, he returned to find his home strangely silent. The hearth was cold, the air heavy with an unspoken dread. Without warning, a madness seized him, a storm raging behind his eyes, turning friend into foe, love into shadow. In his frenzy, he lashed out, shattering what he held most dear, his hands no longer those of a protector but of destruction. When the madness lifted, the horror of his deeds settled over him like a leaden cloak. The villagers, once his allies, turned wary, whispering that the son of Zeus was touched by a darkness no man could fight alone. Amphitryon, heartbroken, sought counsel from the oracles, desperate for a path to cleanse his son's name and soul. The Pythia at Delphi, her voice trembling like wind through reeds, spoke of penance, of labors that could wash away even the deepest stains. It was here that Hercules' true journey began, not only of strength, but of redemption, trial, and a quest that would echo through eternity. Each labor a step further from the madness, each monster faced a piece of the shadow wrestled into light. And yet, even as he prepared to meet these tasks, the gods watched, some with hope, others with grudging respect, and Hera, ever patient, with a smile that held the promise of storms yet to come. The sun hung low over the rolling hills of Nemea, painting the sky in bruised purples and burning golds as Hercules approached the cursed land. The villagers spoke in hushed tones of the beast that prowled their woods, an enormous lion whose hide was said to be impervious to spear or arrow, a creature born of shadow and nightmare. Its roar echoed through the valleys like the bellow of a storm, sending birds flapping wild into the darkening sky. Hercules tightened the straps of his worn leather sandals, feeling the weight of his task settle over him like the cool evening mist. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and somewhere close, the The faint rustle of leaves hinted at the unseen presence of the lion itself. He had faced beasts before, but this was different, a creature not born merely of flesh and bone, but woven from the very fabric of terror that gripped the hearts of men. He moved quietly, each step measured and deliberate, as if the forest demanded respect for the coming confrontation. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath his feet. A great shadow leapt from the underbrush, muscles rippling like waves beneath golden fur that shimmered even in the fading light. The lion's eyes burned with an ancient fury, and it charged with a roar that shook the trees. Hercules dodged, feeling the rush of hot breath and the snap of jaws just inches from his arm. His arrows shattered harmlessly against the beast's impenetrable hide, and his sword glanced off like a thunderclap lost in a storm. Realizing brute force alone would not win this fight, Hercules dropped his weapons and seized the lion with his bare hands. The battle became a furious dance of strength and will, the two locked in a struggle where neither could yield. His fingers found purchase beneath the beast's jaw, his arms wrapped tight around its neck like a living noose. The lion twisted and bucked, but Hercules' grip was relentless, and slowly, inexorably, he crushed the life from the monstrous creature. When at last the great beast lay still, Hercules stood victorious, his chest heaving, the forest falling silent as if paying tribute. He skinned the lion with his own hands, the hide thick and tough, and fashioned for himself a cloak that would become both armor and symbol, an emblem of a hero who faced darkness and emerged unbroken. Draped in the lion's pelt, Hercules walked back to the village, the weight of the skin as heavy as the destiny settling upon his shoulders. Around him, whispers grew into songs, and the world began to know the name of the man who would become legend. The swampy marshes of Lerna stretched like a dark mirror beneath a sky swollen with heavy clouds, the air thick with the tang of stagnant water and the distant cries of unseen creatures. Hercules approached the fetid ground with wary steps, the memory of the Nemean lion's unyielding hide still heavy on his skin like a mantle of iron. Here, the challenge was unlike any he had faced, a creature not only fierce but cunning, its breath fetid, its many heads rising like twisted branches from a monstrous, serpentine neck. The Lernaean Hydra was a beast born of the ancient darkness, its heads writhing in unholy dance, each a whisper of death. As Hercules drew near, the water rippled and hissed, and the air pulsed with the creature's terrible power. His heart pounded in time with the slow, deliberate lapping of the swamp's edge. He knew the tales. Cut one head and two more would sprout in its place, a seemingly endless torment crafted by the gods themselves to test the mettle of any who dared confront it. Armed with his sword and a burning resolve, Hercules waded into the murky depths, the mud sucking at his sandals as if the earth itself sought to claim him. The Hydra's many eyes opened, glowing with malice, and it lunged with a fury born of millennia of rage and hunger. Their battle was a whirlwind of strikes and dodges, steel ringing against scale, the sickening snap of jaws inches from flesh. Each time Hercules severed a head, two more erupted in its place, writhing and hissing like angry flames licking at dry timber. Realizing brute force alone would doom him, Hercules called upon his faithful nephew Iolaus, who stood at the swamp's edge with a blazing torch. As Hercules struck each head, Iolaus scorched the neck stump, cauterizing the wound to prevent regrowth. The teamwork turned the tide of the battle, the fiery torchlight dancing across scales slick with swamp water and blood. The Hydra's heads writhed and shrieked, but slowly, one by one, they fell silent, until at last only a single immortal head remained, its gaze fixed and unblinking. Hercules seized it with hands that had known both tenderness and destruction, twisting and crushing until even that last vestige of the creature's terrible life was extinguished. Exhausted, he stood among the reeds, the swamp eerily still around him as if the very earth sighed in relief. He bound the immortal head and carried it back, knowing its power was not to be underestimated but must be kept from harm's way. Each labor etched deeper into the legend of Hercules, weaving a tapestry of strength, cunning, and a will unbroken by despair. Above, the gods watched, some with envy, some with grudging respect, and Hera, still patient, still scheming, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. The golden sun shimmered low over the vast forests of Arcadia, where the air was thick with the scent of pine resin and the whisper of ancient leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. Hercules stepped beneath the canopy, his senses sharp as a hawk's, for he knew this task required not only strength but the softest touch and the patience of the wild itself. The Cyrenian hind was no ordinary beast. It was a creature of grace and swiftness, its golden antlers shining like the first light of dawn, and its hooves so light they seemed barely to touch the earth. The creature was sacred to Artemis, the huntress goddess, and to capture it without harm was a challenge whispered in the wind as nearly impossible. Days passed as Hercules tracked the hind through tangled underbrush and over mossy stones, following the faintest of prints and listening for the delicate rustle of leaves that marked its passage. At times, the hind seemed a spirit rather than flesh, darting between shafts of light and shadow, teasing the hunter with glimpses too quick to catch. On one afternoon, when the sun dipped behind a veil of clouds and the forest fell into a hush, Hercules finally spotted the hind drinking from a crystal-clear stream. His breath caught, and his muscles tensed with the thrill of the hunt, but he knew this was no battle of brawn. Moving with care, he lowered his club, choosing instead the quiet step and steady hand, inching closer as the creature lifted its head, eyes wide and unafraid. The moment stretched, delicate as a spider's web glistening with dew. With a swift, gentle motion, Hercules snared the hind with a golden net gifted by the gods themselves, careful not to hurt even a hair. The hind struggled briefly but then seemed to understand, its wild spirit softened by the strength and kindness in Hercules' eyes. Yet, as he prepared to carry his prize back, the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. The sound of swift footsteps broke the silence, and there appeared Artemis, radiant and fierce, her silver bow poised with tension. Her gaze, sharp as the arrow she loosed, fixed on Hercules with both anger and challenge. "You dare to touch what is sacred to me," she demanded, voice echoing like the call of the wild. Hercules met her gaze steadily, explaining the command that bound him, the trials he must endure. Artemis, after a moment that felt like eternity, lowered her bow, her expression softening. "Then prove your respect, mortal. Let this capture be not of violence but of reverence." With that, she vanished into the woods, leaving Hercules to carry the hind gently, the weight of the sacred trust settling on his shoulders. The labor was complete, not through conquest but through honor, a lesson in humility woven into the tale of a hero. Above, the gods observed, whispers of admiration mixing with the ever-present watchfulness of Hera, whose plans twisted ever deeper into the fabric of Hercules' fate. The winter air bit sharply across the slopes of Mount Erymanthos, where frosted pines stood silent sentinels over fields dusted white with snow. Hercules pulled his cloak tighter around his broad shoulders as he trudged through the icy underbrush, the crunch of frozen earth beneath his boots a steady rhythm in the quiet morning. The Erymanthian boar was a creature of fierce reputation, massive, wild, and cunning, with tusks like curved daggers and eyes that burned with untamed fury. It had terrorized the countryside for years, rooting up fields, scattering flocks, and challenging even the bravest hunters to face its wrath. This labor demanded not only strength but cunning, for the boar's charge was swift and deadly, and many who sought it found only broken bones and bitter defeat. Hercules moved with the patience of a mountain stream, tracking the beast's path through broken branches and overturned soil. The scent of earth and pine mingled with a faint trace of musk that marked the boar's passage. After days of silent pursuit, he found it at a frozen pond, its breath misting in the cold air as it snorted and pawed the ice. Without hesitation, Hercules sprang into action, wielding his great club with the force of a thunderclap. The boar charged, a living battering ram fueled by fury and survival. Their clash sent sprays of snow and ice flying like shattered glass, the ground trembling beneath their battle. Hercules dodged a lethal tusk and grabbed the creature's bristling manet, muscles straining as he wrestled the beast to the ground. The struggle was fierce, but the hero's strength proved greater, and soon the boar lay subdued, its wild eyes dimming with reluctant surrender. Hercules bound the creature with strong ropes, careful to avoid harm, and carried it back to King Eurystheus, the man whose commands had set these labors in motion. The king, who had been hiding in terror behind a bronze jar, leapt from his hiding place in disbelief, his cries of astonishment echoing through the hall. The boar, once a symbol of fear, was now a captive trophy, and with it, Hercules added another thread to the growing legend woven around his name. Yet beneath the triumph, the shadow of Hera's wrath lingered, a reminder that this journey was far from over. The sun had barely risen over the plains of Elis when Hercules arrived at the gates of King Augeas's palace, the morning light gilding the towering columns and sprawling courtyards like molten gold spilled over marble. The air carried the heavy scent of earth and dung, a thick perfume that spoke of the labor ahead with unyielding honesty. Augeas, a man of immense wealth and pride, ruled his lands with a gaze as sharp as a falcon's and a voice that rolled like distant thunder. Yet even his confidence faltered when he looked out over the Augean stables, vast pens stretching farther than the eye could see, filled with the dung of thousands of cattle, untouched for decades. The stench was said to be so fierce that no man had dared clean the stables in 30 years, and the task had become a symbol of impossible toil, whispered in hushed voices by farmers and servants alike. Hercules stood at the edge of this monstrous mess, the ground soft and quaking beneath his feet. The challenge was not of battle or brute force alone, but of ingenuity and perseverance, a test that would weigh not just on his muscles but on his mind. Augeas, skeptical yet bound by his oath to Eurystheus, offered a wager. If Hercules could clean the stables in a single day, the king would grant him a great reward, but if he failed, he would forfeit much of his promised glory. The young hero smiled beneath his lion's cloak, not out of arrogance but because the challenge ignited a fire within, a chance to prove that strength and wisdom could dance together as partners. As dawn deepened into morning, Hercules surveyed the vast network of stables and dung heaps, the foul air pressing like a living thing against his chest. He could feel the eyes of the gods upon him, some curious, some amused, others, like Hera, simmering with plans yet unseen. He realized quickly that no ordinary labor would suffice. The ground was thick with muck so deep that his boots sank with every step, and the air was alive with the buzzing of flies that swarmed like tiny shadows. The task seemed endless, but Hercules was not a man to be daunted by mountains of manure. Instead of attempting the impossible by hand, he turned his gaze toward the mountains that framed the plains, where two rivers, Alpheus and Peneus, rushed swift and sure, their waters cold and unrelenting. With a cunning smile, he set to work redirecting their flow, carving new channels through the earth with his bare hands and mighty strength. The water roared down the newly forged paths, flooding the stables with a cleansing torrent that swept away decades of filth in rushing waves. The sight was both terrifying and magnificent. Muddy water churned like a river in fury, carrying the stench and waste out to the fields beyond, leaving behind clean floors and the sharp scent of fresh earth. The labor took every ounce of Hercules' strength and patience, the chill of the rushing rivers biting through his cloak and armor, his muscles burning from the strain of shaping the land itself. All day long he worked, sweat and water mingling on his skin, his breath coming in steady, determined bursts. Villagers gathered at a cautious distance, eyes wide as they witnessed the impossible made real, the hero bending nature to his will. Yet even as the sun dipped toward the horizon and the last traces of filth were swept away, Augeas refused to honor his word, his greed blinding him to the truth. He claimed that Hercules had cheated, that the rivers themselves had done the work and that no true labor had been performed. Enraged but undeterred, Hercules declared that justice would have its due, and soon the dispute led to a war that toppled Augeas' reign and restored honor to the hero's name. This labor, unlike the beasts felled or the battles won, was a test of mind and spirit as much as muscle, a reminder that the greatest challenges are not always those faced with sword or club but those requiring cunning and unyielding will. And above the plains of Elis, the gods continued their watch, the strands of fate twisting ever tighter around the lion-cloaked figure who marched steadily toward immortality. The dark waters of Lake Stymphalus lay still beneath a sky mottled with gathering clouds, a surface so quiet it seemed to hold its breath in uneasy anticipation. The air here was thick with the scent of wet earth and decaying reeds, and from the shadows of the dense surrounding forest came faint, haunting calls, sharp cries that sent a chill crawling down Hercules' spine. These were the domain of the Stymphalian birds, creatures said to be part man, part fowl, with wings that spread wide like the sails of a storm-battered ship and beaks sharp as the finest swords. Their feathers were a polished sheen of metal, glinting coldly even in the fading light, and their eyes burned with a cunning intelligence that spoke of malice as old as the forests themselves. For years, the birds had terrorized the countryside, swooping down in murderous flocks to shred crops, peck at cattle, and drive even the bravest men from their homes. Farmers spoke in hushed whispers of entire villages left desolate, the air darkened by the beating of countless wings. Hercules stood at the edge of the lake, his breath slow and steady, his muscles coiled like a panther ready to spring. He knew that brute strength alone would not be enough to face creatures that could take to the skies and strike like lightning. His keen eyes scanned the tangled reeds and twisted trees that lined the water's edge, searching for any sign of movement. Suddenly, a sharp metallic clang echoed through the stillness, and the air erupted with a terrifying chorus of cries as the birds took flight in a swirling cloud of feathers and fury. Their wings beat the air like thunder, a storm made flesh and fury, casting sharp shadows that danced across the surface of the lake. Hercules raised his arms, reaching for the bronze castanets crafted by Hephaestus himself, gifts from the god of fire and forge, their clamor designed to frighten and scatter the winged menace. The noise shattered the air, a clattering cacophony that sent the birds into a confused frenzy. Screeches and flapping filled the sky as the creatures took to erratic flight, their metal feathers glinting like shards of broken glass. Seizing the moment, Hercules drew his bow, steadying his breath as he let fly arrow after arrow, each finding its mark with deadly precision. The birds fell from the sky in clattering heaps, their cries fading into the stillness once more. Yet the battle was far from over. Some of the survivors regrouped, diving toward him with razor-sharp talons and savage cries, forcing Hercules to duck and parry with his great club, each blow ringing like a bell forged in war. The dance of death wove through the twilight woods, the hero's strength and skill tested like never before. At one point, a particularly bold bird lunged, its beak snapping just inches from his face, and Hercules grinned, the thrill of the fight lighting his eyes like wildfire. "Is that all you've got?" he shouted, swinging his club in a wide arc that sent feathers and sparks flying. As the last of the birds fell, silence settled over the lake once more, broken only by the heavy breaths of the victor and the distant croak of a lone frog. Hercules gathered the fallen feathers as proof of his conquest, knowing that Eurystheus would need undeniable evidence before he could rest. The labor had tested his agility as much as his strength, teaching him that every challenge demanded a new kind of courage, a willingness to face not only the beast but the unpredictable winds of fate. Far above, the gods murmured their approval, the threads of destiny weaving tighter around the son of Zeus. Hera, watching still with narrowed eyes, smiled a smile that promised storms yet to come, her fury as constant as the tides. The salt-sprayed winds of the Aegean carried Hercules' ship gently toward the rocky shores of Crete, the island's rugged cliffs rising like the jagged teeth of some ancient beast biting into the sky. The sun glinted off restless waves, casting silver ribbons across the sea's surface as gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp and echoing. The task before Hercules was one that whispered through the halls of myth, a great bull, fierce and untamed, with eyes like molten fire and strength that could shake the earth beneath its hooves. This beast had been sent by Poseidon himself as both gift and curse, a symbol of power and wildness bound to the island's very soul. Landing at the harbor of Knossos, Hercules felt the weight of the island's ancient magic pressing around him, thick as the salt in the air. The locals watched with a mix of awe and fear, for the bull had torn through villages, uprooted olive groves, and sent even the bravest warriors fleeing like frightened lambs. The ground bore the scars of its rampage, deep gouges in the earth, shattered stones, and broken fences strewn like toothpicks after a feast. Hercules made his way toward the creature's last known haunt, the rocky plains beneath Mount Ida, where the earth seemed scorched and cracked, as if bearing the marks of the bull's furious charge. As he approached, the distant thunder of hooves grew louder, a rhythmic pounding that echoed in his chest like a drumbeat of war. Suddenly, the bull burst from a thicket of brambles, muscles rippling beneath slick hide, nostrils flaring steam in the cool air. Its eyes locked on Hercules with a primal intelligence, challenging and wild. Without hesitation, Hercules met its charge, stepping forward to meet the beast's fury with a calm as steady as the mountain itself. The clash was earth-shattering. Horns met shoulder, breath steamed in the cold air, and dust rose in swirling clouds around them. Hercules grappled with the bull, his hands finding purchase on its thick neck as they rolled across the rugged terrain, each trying to claim dominance. The bull's strength was immense, but Hercules' resolve was fiercer. With a mighty roar, he seized the beast by the horns and twisted, driving it to submission through sheer force of will. When the dust settled, the bull stood calm beside him, its wild fire tempered by the hero's steady grip. Hercules led the creature back across the island, the people watching in stunned silence as the once feared terror now followed obediently like a tamed storm. The bull would later find new purpose, offered to the gods, its strength a testament to the hero's triumph over raw power and chaos. Yet in the quiet moments beneath the stars, Hercules felt the wildness still pulsing beneath the beast's skin, a reminder that some forces, no matter how subdued, never lose their fire. The gods murmured their praise from Olympus, while Hera's gaze burned with a quiet fury, her plots weaving ever tighter as the son of Zeus moved closer to his destiny. The dawn broke pale and silver over the rugged cliffs of Thrace, where the wind carried the bitter tang of salt and wild herbs, and the cry of distant hawks echoed over the jagged landscape. Hercules stood at the edge of a great plain, the ground beneath his feet cracked and dry, scattered with bones bleached by sun and time. Here, the infamous mares of Diums roamed, for wild horses of enormous size, their eyes blazing with a savage intelligence, manes tangled like storm clouds, and hooves that struck the earth like thunder. These were no ordinary beasts. Born of war and fed on human flesh, the mares were said to be impossible to tame, their hunger as relentless as the harsh Thracian winter. Their master, Diums, was a cruel king, a man as savage as the creatures he bred, delighting in the terror they sowed across the land. Villagers told tales in fearful whispers of caravans ambushed, of warriors dragged screaming to their doom beneath the hooves of those monstrous horses. Hercules felt the weight of the task settle upon him like a dark cloud. He knew that brute strength alone would not win this labor. Cunning and courage must walk hand in hand. Approaching Dium's fortress, a grim stone stronghold crowned with twisted banners, Hercules' eyes narrowed as guards spotted him and rushed forth, weapons drawn. With a roar like a storm unleashed, Hercules cut through the attackers, his lion's cloak billowing like a banner of defiance. Inside the walls, Diums awaited, a towering figure clad in dark bronze armor, his gaze as cold and hard as the iron of his sword. "So, the son of Zeus dares to claim my mares," he sneered, voice like grinding stones. "You will find them wilder than any god or mortal can tame." Hercules stepped forward, muscles coiled and eyes blazing with fierce determination. "I do not seek to tame them by force, but by will," he replied, voice steady as a mountain stream. The stables reeked of sweat and blood, and from within came the thunderous stamping of hooves. As the gates swung open, the mares burst forth, their nostrils flaring, eyes wild with fury and hunger. The battle was a tempest of hooves and muscle, the air filled with the thunderous pounding as Hercules dodged strikes, his great club swinging in wide arcs that shattered bones and sent shockwaves through the earth. But the key lay not in fighting, but in strategy. Hercules seized Diums, hurling him to the ground and binding him with heavy chains. As the tyrant king was dragged toward the horses, their savage hunger turned upon their master, their teeth tearing into the flesh that had fed their cruelty. With Diums subdued, the mares, their rage quelled, calmed under Hercules' steady hand. He led them away from the fortress, their wild eyes now reflecting not fear but a grudging respect. The road back was long and fraught with peril, but the hero's resolve never wavered. Villagers who had cowered from the beasts now watched in or as Hercules rode past, the monstrous horses transformed from terror to testament of his unyielding will. Yet, as always, Heros' shadow lingered, a dark thread in the tapestry of his fate, weaving challenges yet unseen. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and wildflowers as Hercules' ship cut through the waves toward the distant shores of the land of the Amazons, a realm whispered of in legends and songs, a land ruled by fierce warrior women, proud as lions and swift as hawks. The island lay shrouded in mist, its dense forests rising like emerald towers, hiding secrets and dangers beneath their leafy canopy. Among these warriors was Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, renowned for her strength, courage, and the magnificent girdle bestowed upon her by Ars himself, the god of war. The girdle was more than a simple belt. It was a symbol of authority, power, and divine favor, said to grant its wearer the might to command legions and tame even the wildest of storms. As Hercules approached the Amazon camp, the warriors stood like statues carved from bronze and steel, their eyes sharp and unyielding. The air hummed with the tension of impending conflict, yet also with a strange sense of respect, for even these fierce women knew the name of Hercules, son of Zeus, hero of legend. When he finally stood before Hippolyta, her gaze met his with the calm of a storm barely restrained. Her voice was clear and strong, a melody laced with steel. "Why do you come to our land, stranger? To fight or to bargain?" Hercules, proud but respectful, spoke of the task laid upon him by King Eurystheus, the quest to claim her girdle and bring it back as a token of his strength. Hippolyta studied him a moment, then smiled, a rare, flickering thing that held both warmth and warning. "If it is strength you seek, prove it. But know this, the girdle is not given lightly." In the days that followed, Hercules and Hippolyta shared moments that blurred the lines between foe and friend. He learned of the Amazons' fierce loyalty to their land and each other, their stories of battles fought and honor won. They sparred beneath ancient oaks, their weapons clashing in a dance of power and grace, each testing the other's mettle with laughter and fierce determination. But fate, as ever, is a tangled web. Hera, lurking like a shadow in the wings of the tail, stirred unrest among the Amazons, whispering lies and fanning flames of suspicion. The warriors, once open to parley, turned wary and hostile, their spears raised against the intruder who sought their queen's prized possession. In the chaos, what began as a negotiation erupted into battle. The clash of bronze rang through the forest, the ground trembling beneath the fury of warriors unmatched in skill and courage. Hercules fought with the strength of storms, but also with a heart heavy with regret. As the dust settled, Hippolyta, recognizing the hero's valor and honor, surrendered the girdle. Yet not without a warning that power is a flame to be wielded wisely, lest it consume all. Bearing the girdle, Hercules left the land of the Amazons, the weight of the task heavy in both his hands and his soul. The labor was more than a conquest. It was a lesson in respect, trust, and the fragile line between war and peace. Above, the gods watched, their voices a murmur in the winds, and Hero's smile was a blade hidden beneath silk, ready to strike when the moment came. The sun scorched the endless plains of the far west, where the earth cracked and shimmered under a sky so wide it seemed to swallow the horizon whole. Hercules journeyed toward the distant land of Erythea, a place whispered of with both fear and fascination, where the monstrous Geryon dwelled. Geryon was no ordinary man but a giant with 3 bodies joined at the waist, each with its own pair of arms and legs, a titan of strength and power who ruled over a herd of magnificent red cattle that grazed on the blood-stained plains. The cattle were said to be as numerous as the stars, their hides gleaming like burnished copper, their strength unmatched by any beast in the known world. As Hercules crossed harsh deserts and rocky mountains, the weight of the labor settled heavy upon him, the memory of battles past mingling with the heat and dust that clung to his skin. The journey was long and perilous, each step a test of endurance as the hero pressed forward through lands where even the winds seemed hostile. Upon arrival, the sight that met him was as terrifying as the stories foretold. Geryon stood atop a rocky promontory, his 3 bodies flexing in unison like the fierce beating of a triple drum. His voice boomed across the plains, a thunderous challenge that shook the air. "Who dares approach my cattle, thief of the gods?" Hercules answered with steady courage, "I am Hercules, son of Zeus, here to claim what is mine by task and fate." The battle that followed was a dance of titans. Geryon struck with arms like tree trunks, each body moving with terrifying coordination. But Hercules, with the strength of storms and the cunning born of countless trials, dodged and countered, each blow landing with the force of mountains crashing. As the sun dipped low, the battle reached its climax, Hercules driving his sword through the heart of the giant, his bodies collapsing in a thunderous heap upon the blood-stained earth. With the master defeated, the herdsman Eurytion appeared, seeking to defend the cattle with fierce resolve. But Hercules was relentless, his great club and unyielding will overcoming every obstacle. Gathering the prized cattle, Hercules began the arduous trek home, the beasts lowing softly as if sensing the hero's strength and honor. The journey back was no less fraught, as bandits and wild beasts alike sought to claim the magnificent herd. But Hercules' courage and might held firm, the cattle trailing behind like a living river of red. Each step brought him closer to the end of the labors, each breath a reminder of the destiny that awaited. Above the burning plains, the gods whispered in wind and flame, their voices weaving fate's tapestry, while Hera's eyes burned with the fire of unyielding hatred, her plots darkening like storm clouds ready to break. The sun dipped low behind the western mountains, spilling molten gold across the rippling waves of the sea, as Hercules set sail toward a land wrapped in mystery and legend, the distant realm of the Hesperides. This was no ordinary journey, for the garden he sought was said to lie beyond the edge of the world, guarded by enchantments as old as time itself. The golden apples it held were not mere fruit but treasures of the gods, gifts of immortality and power, coveted by many but claimed by few. The garden's caretakers were the Hesperides, nymphs of twilight whose laughter was like the tinkling of distant bells and whose beauty was as radiant as the evening star. Yet guarding the apples was the greatest challenge. Ladin, a dragon with 100 shimmering heads, each breathing venomous fire, coils that writhed like living shadows beneath the sacred trees. As Hercules' ship cut through the sea's glassy surface, the air thickened with magic, and the boundary between mortal and divine blurred. His heart pounded with anticipation and a reverence born of the sacredness of his quest. Upon arrival, Hercules found the garden lush beyond imagining. Trees heavy with golden fruit, their leaves whispering secrets in the soft breeze, and flowers that glowed with an otherworldly light. Yet the tranquility was shattered by the sinister hiss and flicker of Ladin's many heads, eyes gleaming like molten jewels, watching every step with deadly vigilance. Hercules moved with careful determination, knowing that brute force alone would not defeat such a guardian. His mind raced through tales and whispers, recalling that Atlas, the titan who bore the heavens upon his shoulders, was the father of the nymphs and keeper of the golden apples. Seeking counsel, Hercules found Atlas resting beneath the sky's vast dome, his figure vast and weary, shoulders bowed but spirit unbroken. "Mighty Atlas," Hercules began, voice respectful yet firm, "I seek the golden apples of the Hesperides. Will you grant me aid in this labor?" Atlas's eyes sparkled with a mixture of weariness and challenge. "If you can bear the weight of the heavens for but a moment, the apples shall be yours to claim." With a nod, Hercules stepped forward, shouldering the immense burden with a groan that echoed across the land. The sky seemed to press down, a crushing weight of stars and clouds, but Hercules stood firm, muscles straining like ancient oaks in a storm. Atlas, relieved of his burden, went in search of the apples, returning with the precious fruit, each glowing like captured sunlight. Yet, as the Titan prepared to reclaim his celestial load, Hercules' cunning stirred. "Would you not carry this weight a while longer, great Atlas, while I secure the apples safely?" he asked with a sly smile. The Titan, eager for respite, agreed, but Hercules' grip tightened like iron, and with a roar, he lifted the heavens once more, freeing the apples for his journey home. The return was fraught with care, for the apple's magic was potent and coveted. The labor was a testament not only to Hercules' strength but to his wit, a dance between might and mind that marked his path toward legend. Above, the gods watched with quiet awe, their voices a chorus woven into the very winds, while Heros' eyes burned with a cold fire, ever scheming in the shadows of fate. The gates of the underworld yawned wide beneath a sky drained of stars, a threshold into realms where shadows clung like thick fog and silence pressed heavy as a tombstone. Hercules, draped in his lion's cloak and armed with his unyielding spirit, stood at the edge of this dark kingdom, a land where no mortal dared tread without the blessing or wrath of the gods. His final labor awaited him here, a test not of beasts or earthly challenges, but of courage against death itself. Before him lay Cerberus, the monstrous three-headed hound, guardian of Hades' realm, whose eyes blazed with fiery menace and whose snarling jaws could crush the spirits of the dead and living alike. The beast's breath was a noxious wind, its body a mountain of muscle and shadow, each head snapping with fury and vigilance. Hercules knew this labor demanded more than strength. It required respect for the dark powers, resolve to face the unknown, and a heart unshaken by fear. As he stepped through the veil of gloom, the air grew cold and thick, whispers of lost souls swirling like autumn leaves caught in an eternal storm. The underworld's bleak landscape stretched out in all directions, rivers of sorrow and forgetfulness winding through shadows that danced with a life of their own. At the throne of Hades, the Lord of the Dead himself regarded Hercules with a gaze that was both warning and curiosity. "Son of Zeus," Hades intoned, voice echoing like distant thunder, "you seek to claim my guardian as your prize. Will you face the darkness and emerge unbroken?" Hercules met his gaze steadily. "I do not seek to steal, but to prove my worth and fulfill the fate set before me." With a nod, Hades granted permission, warning that should Hercules fail, he would join the ranks of the lost forever. The moment came when Cerberus appeared, a living nightmare of muscle and teeth, its three heads snarling and snapping, eyes blazing like coals in the dark. The beast lunged with terrifying speed, but Hercules stood firm, dodging snarls and biting jaws with the grace of a seasoned warrior. With calm strength, he grasped the massive necks, one hand on each head, his grip like a vice forged in thunder and will. The battle was a tempest of snarls, growls, and the clash of wills, a dance of life and death beneath the weight of the underworld's silent gaze. Slowly, Hercules' unyielding hold tamed the beast's fury until Cerberus' snarls softened into low rumbles of submission. Together, they walked from the depths into the world above, the shadows retreating before the light of dawn breaking across the horizon. The hero's heart pounded with triumph and relief, for he had faced death itself and emerged victorious, the final labor completed in a crescendo of strength, courage, and destiny fulfilled. As he returned Cerberus to Hades' realm, the gates closed behind them with a solemn finality, marking the end of one journey and the beginning of legend. The gods on Olympus whispered in awe and approval, their voices mingling with the winds of fate, while Heros' fury simmered beneath the surface, a tempest still brewing but slowed by the tide of destiny's unstoppable flow. After the thunderous conclusion of the 12 labors, Hercules found himself standing at a crossroads where mortal toil met divine fate. The weight of his deeds pressed upon him like the lion's pelt still draped across his shoulders, a symbol of strength earned through trials that had tested every fiber of his being. Yet, even as the crowds of mortals hailed him as a hero, whispers lingered in the wind, whispers of challenges yet unseen, of friendships forged in fire and betrayals cold as winter's breath. Among the first to cross his path was Iolaus, his steadfast nephew and companion through many trials. Their bond was one forged not only in blood but in shared hardship and quiet moments beneath starlit skies. Iolaus's laughter was a balm to Hercules' wearied soul, his counsel steady as the northern star, and together they navigated the tangled web of mortal politics and divine intrigue. One evening, as the sun bled crimson behind the hills, the two sat beside a crackling fire, sharing tales of battles past and dreams of peace. "Nephew," Hercules said, voice soft beneath the roar of flames, "these labors have made me stronger, but I feel the weight of destiny pressing still. Tell me, what lies ahead for a man who has walked so close to godhood?" Iolaus smiled, eyes reflecting the dancing firelight. "Perhaps, cousin, the greatest battles are those fought within, the fight for honor, for love, for a legacy beyond mere strength." Yet not all who crossed Hercules' path bore friendship in their hearts. The goddess Hera, whose fury had long shadowed him, continued to weave her intricate plots, seeking to ensnare the hero in webs of sorrow and despair. Her subtle manipulations reached even mortal courts, twisting allies into foes and casting doubts that gnawed at Hercules' spirit. In one dark twist, a trusted companion turned traitor, lured by promises whispered in the quiet halls of Olympus. The sting of betrayal was sharp, a wound that no mortal strength could easily heal. But Hercules, ever resilient, found solace in moments of quiet reflection and the unwavering loyalty of those who stood by him. His journey beyond the labors was not only a saga of might but a profound tale of growth, of learning that even the strongest must bend to fate's will and that true power lies not just in muscle but in heart. Slowly, the son of Zeus felt the stirrings of something greater within, a transformation beckoning from the horizon of his mortal life. Whispers spoke of his eventual ascent, the shedding of flesh and blood to join the pantheon above, a god among gods. Yet this path was neither swift nor easy. It was marked by love found and lost, battles fought in shadows, and the quiet moments where a hero must face himself. The gods watched with bated breath, some with admiration, others with envy and fear, as Hercules stepped ever closer to his destiny, his tale weaving through the tapestry of legend like a golden thread catching the light. After the thunder and glory of the labors, Hercules found a rare moment of peace in the gentle hills near Thebes, where wildflowers nodded in the breeze and the sky stretched wide and endless above. Here, in the quiet of the countryside, he was joined by his steadfast friend and nephew, Iolaus, whose presence was a constant anchor in the swirling storm of Hercules' life. One warm evening, the two sat beside a crackling fire beneath a tapestry of stars, their voices low in the soft hush of night. "Iolaus," Hercules began, his voice heavy with unspoken weariness, "though the gods have tested me and the world hails my strength, I find myself wondering what lies beyond the battles. Is there a path to peace for a man like me?" Iolaus smiled, tossing a twig into the flames. "Peace, cousin, may come not from the absence of struggle but from the bonds we forge, friends who stand with us, and a love that lights the darkest nights." It was in this spirit that Hercules met Deianira, a woman of fierce spirit and gentle heart, whose beauty was like the dawn breaking over stormy seas, radiant, unpredictable, and stirring. Their meeting was marked by the clash of fate and fire, as Hercules saved her from a band of marauders, his strength a shield against the chaos. Deianira's eyes, deep pools of emotion, held both gratitude and a fierce spark that drew the hero close. Their love blossomed like a wild rose, beautiful but edged with thorns. Yet beneath the warmth of their union, shadows gathered. Hera's malice seeped into mortal affairs like poison, and even the gods watched with wary eyes as the story of Hercules and Deianira wove toward tragedy. The tale twisted when the centaur Nessus, whose fate was sealed by his own dark desires, offered Deianira a poisoned gift disguised as love's safeguard, a tunic steeped in venom and deceit. Hercules, unaware of the snare laid upon him, wore the garment with tragic consequences, the poison burning through flesh and spirit alike. In his agony, the hero's roar echoed through the mountains, a sound both terrifying and heartbreakingly human. Deianira's grief was a tempest. Her love turned to despair as she realized the role her gift had played in his suffering. Yet even in this darkest hour, Hercules' spirit burned bright, the strength of his heart refusing to yield. With the help of his loyal friends and the mercy of the gods, His final moments became not just an end but a passage, a shedding of mortal pain and the beginning of his ascent to Olympus. The gods welcomed him with open arms, his mortal trials transformed into eternal honor, a place among the stars where his name would be sung forever. And so, the story of Hercules moves beyond the realm of men, a legend woven from strength and sorrow, friendship and love, betrayal and redemption, a tapestry endless as the night sky and as bright as the dawn. As Hercules crossed the shimmering threshold from mortal realm to divine, the very air seemed to pulse with a radiant energy, thick with the fragrance of ambrosia and the soft murmur of eternal voices. Olympus unfolded before him like a vast palace of light and shadow, where marble columns soared to endless skies and gardens bloomed with flowers that never withered, their petals whispering secrets older than time. The gods gathered, their eyes bright with curiosity and respect as the mortal who had earned his place among them stepped forward. Zeus, his thunderbolt poised like a crown of lightning, regarded his son with a father's pride tempered by the wisdom of ages. "Welcome, Hercules," he thundered, his voice like rolling storms. "You have endured trials no man could bear and shown a heart worthy of immortality." Among the deities, Heros' gaze softened, no longer the spiteful force that had shadowed his mortal days, but a complex weave of respect and lingering caution. The great hall filled with the murmur of greetings, the flicker of smiles, and the warmth of bonds newly forged. Hercules, once bound by mortal limits, found himself learning the rhythms of godhood, the slow dance of power and grace, the weaving of fate, and the balance of compassion and strength. He forged friendships with Athena, goddess of wisdom, whose sharp mind challenged his strength with clever riddles and shared counsel beneath olive trees that glowed with silver light. Apollo, radiant as the sun's first dawn, welcomed him with music and laughter, their conversations echoing like gentle waves on marble halls. Even Dionysus, wild god of revelry, offered moments of unrestrained joy, where laughter spilled like wine and worries melted into the night. Yet with divinity came new challenges, responsibilities heavier than any club or battle. Hercules learned that gods held not just power, but the weight of worlds, the delicate balance of human fate, and the unending dance of cosmos and chaos. His mortal heart, tempered by suffering and love, gave him a unique place among the immortals, a bridge between earth and sky, flesh and spirit. Stories grew of his deeds on Olympus, times he stood between gods to ease disputes, moments when his laughter brought warmth to cold halls, and the quiet compassion he showed to mortal heroes still struggling beneath the stars. His name became a beacon, a symbol that even the greatest trials could be overcome, that strength without heart was empty, and that redemption was always possible. Yet the legacy of Hercules was not only in tales and songs but in the mortal world, where his adventures inspired countless souls to face their own shadows with courage and hope. The constellations traced his form across the night sky, his lion cloak blazing among the stars as a reminder that legends never truly fade. They live on in the hearts of those who dare to dream and endure. And so, the son of Zeus, once mortal and burdened by pain, became immortal and eternal, a hero not just of strength but of spirit, his story a timeless lullaby whispered to those seeking courage in the dark. Though immortal, Hercules' heart remained bound to the mortal world, and many tales tell of the moments when he crossed the veil to walk among men once more, lending his strength and wisdom to those in need. In one such story, Hercules came upon a village plagued by a terrible drought, the earth cracked and barren beneath a relentless sun that withered crops and broke spirits alike. The villagers, gaunt and desperate, had lost all hope. Approaching with the quiet power of a coming storm, Hercules listened to their pleas beneath the cracked skies. With a solemn nod, he lifted his mighty hands to the heavens, calling upon Zeus's favor. Clouds gathered swiftly, rolling across the horizon like waves of dark velvet, and thunder rumbled low and deep. The first drops fell, a gentle patter that soon grew into a life-giving rain, soaking the thirsty earth, reviving green shoots, and filling rivers once more. The villagers rejoiced, their songs rising into the sky, a testament to the hero who bridged mortal and divine realms. In another tale, Hercules found himself challenged by a new foe, not a beast of claw or fang, but a spirit of sorrow named Melancholia, who whispered doubts and fears into the hearts of even the strongest. The struggle was not of muscle but of will, a battle of light against shadow within the soul. Hercules' laughter, bright and fierce, became his weapon, shattering the dark tendrils with the warmth of hope and unyielding courage. Such stories remind us that even gods wrestle with the shadows within, and that true strength lies in facing both the world and oneself. Among the gods, Hercules' place grew not only as a warrior but as a guardian of balance, a protector of both joy and sorrow, strength and vulnerability. He taught that might was noble only when tempered with kindness, and that even immortals could learn from mortal frailty. His friendships deepened, and his laughter echoed through Olympus's halls, a beacon of resilience and light. And thus, the legend of Hercules, forever flowing and expanding, became a river of stories, some fierce as storms, others soft as twilight, inviting all who hear them to find courage, hope, and strength within their own hearts. The skies above Olympus blushed softly with the light of dusk, a gentle sigh of twilight that wrapped the world in hues of rose and lavender. Hercules stood upon a marble balcony overlooking the vast expanse of mortal lands below, where rivers wound like silver ribbons through forests and valleys bathed in the fading sun's glow. The lion's pelt still rested upon his broad shoulders, a silent testament to battles fought and strength earned, not just of muscle, but of heart and spirit. Around him, the murmurs of the gods drifted like warm winds, a chorus of voices woven into the fabric of time itself. Zeus's booming laughter echoed faintly from distant halls, Athena's wise gaze lingered like a steady flame, Apollo's melodies wove through the evening air like golden threads of light. Hercules breathed deeply, feeling the coolness of the air mingle with the lingering warmth of the day, a balance much like the one he had found within himself after years of toil and triumph. In this quiet moment, the hero was neither mortal nor god but something more, a bridge between worlds, a legend alive in the hearts of all who dared to dream and endure. Memories stirred like gentle ripples across the surface of a still lake, the fierce clashes with monsters, the friendships forged in fire, the betrayals that had tested his soul, and the love that both healed and haunted him. Each thread of his story shimmered, not as an ending, but as part of an endless tapestry that stretched across the stars. Above, the constellations took shape, Leo the lion roaring proudly across the night sky, a celestial monument to courage and strength. And beneath those stars, countless voices whispered the name of Hercules, a lullaby sung in many tongues, a tale passed from mother to child, from dreamer to dreamer. That is the end of tonight's tales. Thank you for listening and good night.